She was a beautiful young mother who loved being in front of the camera.
She was very, very photogenic, so she definitely wanted to pursue a career in modeling.
She just was always full of life. She was the life of the party.
So when she suddenly goes missing, it's clear something's wrong.
Everybody is on edge searching for her.
We were on a mission, so we were doing our best. We had flashlights, we had glow sticks.
And the investigation reveals a devastating discovery.
It was hard. My heart broke literally in half because of it.
She's dead, okay?
He was crying and screaming.
We still didn't have answers. We still needed the answers.
And when the answers come, they'll shock even the most seasoned investigators.
She started carrying a gun for protection.
I can't prove it, but just by seeing him and the way he was acting, something's not right. Something's not right.
Threatened my family, but he told me, you know, where everybody stay at.
I think this is a cautionary tale that trust is earned.
Detectives know fear is a powerful motivator.
I didn't know if this was a sign of the things to come, that he was gonna get away with this.
Watch the company that you keep.
March 30th, 2014. It's a Saturday afternoon in Gwinnett County, Georgia, a suburb just 30 miles outside the heart of Atlanta.
People from all over the world come here who are seeking work or an employment in and around the Atlanta area.
There's several colleges, there's industry, technology going on here.
For most, today is a day of respite. But for Celia Owens, her weekend has been anything but relaxing.
On Friday evening, Celia agreed to watch the 3-year-old daughter of her friend, Angela Rabate, while Angela was at work.
But Angela never returned to pick up her daughter.
And listen, I'm starting to get really worried. Please, call me back.
She hadn't heard from her, and all of Celia's calls were going straight to voicemail.
Celia starts reaching out to Angela's mother, who lives in Las Vegas.
Hello?
Hi, Judy.
Oh, hi, Celia. What's up?
I don't want to sound overdramatic, but I'm really concerned about Angela.
When Celia called me and told me that Angie had not been there to pick up Shay, there was reason to be concerned because she would not have left her daughter without it being known that she wasn't coming back that night. It was so out of the ordinary for her to do that, so it immediately raised red flags.
I need you to go to the police, okay? I'm gonna get the next flight out, and I'll call you as soon as I land, all right?
Something was really wrong, like something was wrong.
Known for her beauty and spirited personality, 26-year-old Angela Rabate had the charm and fire to take the world head on.
Angie just was always full of life. She was smiles galore, active, energetic, fun-loving, just wanted to be the life of the party.
Angela was a ball of everything. Like, she was funny. Like, that's what kind of gravitated me towards her. She was always joking, just a fun person to be around.
Angela's good looks and magnetic personality landed her several modeling gigs throughout her 20s.
People gravitated towards Angela. So, like, she did a couple of modeling gigs. She did a lot of print model for magazines. She was very, very photogenic, you know? So, yeah, she definitely wanted to pursue a career in modeling.
She hoped a career in modeling would allow her to travel the world.
She just wanted to have fun and enjoy life. She just wanted to see everything. She loved going to Miami. She loved going to New York. She just wanted to travel.
But more than anything else, Angela's greatest love in life was her daughter.
She's an amazing mom. She showered her with love and wanted her daughter to, you know, have the best upbringing.
She wanted the world for her daughter. Everything was about baby Shay.
However, as much as Angela hoped for a traditional family unit, her relationship with Shay's father wasn't working out.
When I met Angie, she was with her daughter's father, Brian Dunn, and they were kind of like in a rocky spot. I think he didn't like her line of work.
Eventually, they decided to part ways, but they remained in close contact for the sake of their daughter.
When Angela and Brian broke up, it was messy at first. She was really hurt by it because she didn't want to be a single parent and she didn't want to not be with him because she actually loved him. And it took a lot of them, talking and getting past the anger for them to be on a better understanding.
As Angela was trying to move on from the heartbreak, she was met with a blast from the past.
In February 2014, someone she knew from back in the day walked back in her life. That was 29-year-old Charles Outlaw.
They grew up very close as teenagers, but as they grew up as adults, they lost touch.
Charles and Angela found each other on social media and reconnected.
Wow. Where you been, girl?
Oh my God, it's just been so long.
It was almost like no time had passed at all, and they picked right back up where they left off.
Come get a drink with me tonight.
Tonight?
Yeah.
Angie was a beautiful young lady. It was easy to have a crush on her. She was stunning, and she used to tell me, Mom, remember, he always had a crush on me. He still really likes me.
Even though Angela wasn't ready for another relationship, she still enjoyed Charles' company.
Angie did not have a car at the time, so Charles would take her, go get her nails done, go get her hair done.
She sent me a picture of some shoes that he had bought Shay without her even asking him to do it. So he would do those little things that kind of win her over.
Angela looked at him as somebody she could really depend on, and she was really grateful for that.
But 1 month later, Angela Rabate has disappeared into thin air.
She hasn't returned to pick up her daughter after leaving her with a friend.
It immediately raised red flags.
Something was really wrong.
As Angela's mother catches the next flight from Las Vegas, Angela's friend Celia heads to the Gwinnett County Police Department to report her missing.
So when's the last time you heard from her?
Not since Friday night when she dropped off her daughter. It was around 11 p.m.
Where was she going?
She was working an event.
Celia doesn't have many details, but she does know the venue was a ritzy home in Smyrna, about 10 miles outside of Atlanta.
Celia says Angela was working the party as an exotic dancer.
Angela had recently picked up dancing as a way to provide for her daughter.
She would make hundreds, in fact, thousands in one night. She performed under the stage name Climax and made a name for herself.
Any job where you're working at night in the city in the entertainment industry can be extremely dangerous.
She was getting so much attention because of her beauty and her skill set that she started carrying a gun for protection.
Being a dancer in Atlanta, you're constantly coming into contact with people who are out and about for nefarious reasons.
Did her profession put her in danger that night?
In March of 2014, 26-year-old Angela Rabate was reconnecting with old friends after weathering a difficult breakup with the father of her daughter.
Angela began spending a lot of time with an old friend from high school named Charles Outlaw.
They started hanging, not tight, but he still was trying to kind of get into the mix. He liked her.
Angela had also picked up a lucrative career as a dancer to help provide for her daughter.
She was working as an exotic dancer, and she was damn good at it.
She would dance at high-end events around Atlanta. One night could net her thousands of dollars.
But now Angela has mysteriously disappeared after going to work at one of those high-end events.
Detectives start to wonder if maybe one of her adoring fans could have gone too far and maybe assaulted Angela or kidnapped her even.
She always has her handgun on her when she's working. She knows how sketchy some guys are out there.
Do you know any of the other girls she works with?
I know Coco. I can give you her number.
That would be helpful. Here. Just write it down there for us.
After wrapping up their interview with Celia, investigators get in touch with Angela's co-worker, Coco Shaw.
I spoke with Coco Shaw over the phone, who told me that she had been at the party with Angela that night.
So it kind of just go over for me what all happened that night that you know of.
Like from the beginning, or?
Yeah, please.
Okay, well, we were booked for a party Friday. We went there when we started the party and everything. It pretty much went good.
Coco says by the end of the night, Angela was starting to lose steam.
The group continued to party, but Coco tells detectives that Angela had a few drinks and needed to lay down.
Hey, hon. You doing all right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just exhausted. It's been a long night.
I asked her, did she need a ride home? But she said she lived in Gwinnett, and she said that some guy was coming from Gwinnett to come get her.
Coco Shaw told me that Angela was in a good mood, that she was laughing, that she was talking to the person on the phone and giving him directions.
Around 5:30 a.m., Angela's ride arrived.
He's here. I'm headed out.
All right, girl. Hey, don't forget this.
Of course not.
Coco tells investigators that when Angela left that night, she had a lot of cash on her, roughly about $2,000. And she also had a money counter.
That money counter, she took it with her everywhere because she, in her line of work, she wanted to make sure she had her money.
She was acting normal. She was like happy. She was just ready to go home. She was tired.
See ya. Bye.
If anyone knows where Angela is, investigators are betting it's her mystery driver. But who is he?
Angela's friend says his name is Charles Outlaw. Detectives want to speak with Charles immediately.
Investigators quickly track down Charles Outlaw for questioning.
Thanks for coming in on such short notice, Charles. We wanted to talk to you about a missing persons case we're working on.
They inform him that Angela is missing, and by all accounts, he was the last person seen with her.
Oh my God. I hope she's all right.
You don't know where she is right now?
No.
He gave a version of events stating that he did pick her up from the job.
Hey.
Hey, thanks for the ride.
And when did you drop her back off at her apartment?
We actually never even made it back to her place.
He said he had to pick up something from his apartment in Norcross, so he parked the car and went inside while Angela remained in the car.
He was only gone a short time, maybe anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes.
Actually, when I got back to the car, she was gone.
He claims he didn't know where she went, and he told us that he had called her a couple of times after she came up missing.
That didn't concern you? You didn't call the police?
Honestly speaking, man, I thought she left with another guy.
He said that they got into an argument when he picked her up from the party. He was complaining about having to pick her up so late, and that made her angry.
I think it's about time for you to get your own car soon, especially with all that money you're making.
What is that supposed to mean?
She kept saying that there were plenty of guys who would have been happy to give her a ride. He also noticed that she was texting other people.
You know what? I can just get somebody else to pick me up.
Stop. Don't worry about it. Let's just get out of here.
Fine.
First, I'm gonna have to make a pit stop before we get to your place.
But when detectives ask Charles what he was grabbing so late in the night, he hesitates.
What did you need to pick up in Norcross?
I went to go pick up some weed.
Charles reluctantly tells police that he's a small-time drug dealer and he had to pick up some marijuana to drop off for a buyer on the way back.
Not only that, but Charles is currently on parole. He was previously incarcerated on drug charges, so this is not a good look.
Look, I don't want to get in trouble.
Detectives in Gwinnett County are speaking with Charles Outlaw about the disappearance of his friend, 26-year-old dancer Angela Rabate.
By all accounts, Charles is the last person to see Angela before she vanished.
And Charles has just admitted that on the night of her disappearance, he was working an illegal drug deal.
Charles reluctantly tells police that he's a small-time drug dealer and he had to pick up some marijuana to drop off for a buyer on the way back to Angela's home.
Not only that, but Charles is currently on parole. He was previously incarcerated on drug charges, so this is not a good look.
Look, I don't want to get in trouble.
Listen, Charles, we're not really worried about the drugs right now. We're more focused on Angela's missing person case.
Charles is relieved.
At that point in time, we wanted him to show me where he last saw Angela, and I asked him to take me on the route that he went when he went home that night.
Now that investigators have identified Angela's last known location, the search for her intensifies.
They had started to organize a search party.
It was at 10 o'clock at night, so it was dark. But again, we were on a mission. So, the detective came out. We were doing our best. We had flashlights, we had glow sticks.
The group scours the area late into the night. Sadly, they came up empty-handed.
I told everyone, listen, let's plan on getting back here tomorrow around 11 a.m. where we can use the daylight.
One person has been noticeably absent from the search. Angela's ex, Brian Dunn.
Someone else reached out for him and told him that she was missing. And he didn't have a car, so he was just like, okay, and then by day 2, he was there.
As the search continues, detectives take Brian aside to ask him some questions.
Anytime there's a case where somebody is missing, law enforcement is always going to look at some of the relationships that person has.
So tell us about your relationship with Angela.
Well, we dated for several years, and we have a daughter together.
How's the co-parenting situation?
It's been fine. No problems.
He indicated to me that they had a co-parenting relationship that was positive. He said that they weren't having any issues.
You haven't had any contact with her since Friday?
No. I didn't even know she was missing until today.
He seems genuinely concerned about Angela's disappearance.
I don't feel like he would harm a hair on her head. I think he still was in love with her, despite everything.
Just then, Brian spots Charles.
Hey!
Brian, it's his first time seeing Charles, and he has questions.
Why would you leave her in the car by herself?
Brian, I think, at one point was kind of pinpointing him and trying to say, no way you're going to come here and just leave Andy in the car and then her just disappear.
Man, you don't know me.
What?
Get the hell out of my face.
Bro?
Get the hell out of my face.
What?
So they get into arguing, and then Charles goes off the rails.
Then a physical altercation breaks out between Brian Dunn and Charles Outlaw.
Hey, break it up. Break it up.
I got in the middle of it, and I told both of them, listen, we're here for a purpose, which is to find Angela, and let's not jump to conclusions on what could have happened.
But as officers attempt to part the two men and restrain them, Charles does something unexpected.
He reached one of his hands into her pocket, pulled out what I later found out to be cocaine, and tried to throw the cocaine away.
What the hell's going on over here?
Between his earlier admission about the illegal drug dealing and being caught red-handed with cocaine, police couldn't let this slide.
I think at that point in time, he realized that he was going to go to jail. He tried to run.
But quick on their feet, officers soon get Charles back under control.
Everyone in the search party started to think that I was arresting Charles for Angela's disappearance, and that obviously was not the case. It was for a probation violation.
At this point, they don't have any hard evidence that Charles has lied to police or that he had any involvement in Angela's disappearance.
When I searched Charles's home, there wasn't any evidence inside the home that led us to where Angela was.
For all they know, she could be somewhere out there alive and well.
But as several more days pass without any sign of Angela, concern continues to mount.
Now, if she was still safe and alive, why wouldn't she have turned up by now?
Detectives are becoming increasingly suspicious that something terrible might have happened to Angela.
And on April 3rd, 6 days after Angela was last seen, the call comes into Gwinnett PD that everyone's been dreading.
Flynn?
They found a body.
All right, we'll be right there.
It was no longer a missing person. This was going to be a homicide investigation.
Six days after Angela Rabate vanished from an apartment complex in Gwinnett County, investigators have received the phone call everyone has been dreading.
Local surveyors alert them of a dead body found 20 miles away in Lilburn, Georgia.
Yep, we'll be right there.
She's right over there. The location is on an industrial road that has nothing but businesses. And that particular area was about a 2-acre size lot of nothing but woods.
When investigators see the body, there's no doubt about it. This is Angela.
I had seen so many pictures of her that it was very evident that it was her immediately. We knew that this was going to be a homicide investigation, and it was no longer a missing person.
It's also clear Angela's death was no accident.
There was a gunshot wound to the back left side of her head.
This was a cold-blooded act of execution.
There was other clothing items, some shoes, boots, makeup bag, and a few personal items that were laying around that area.
The money counter that she had been seen with when she left was missing, as was the money that she had.
When the tragic news reaches Angela's loved ones, they're devastated.
Unfortunately, I had to give Angela's mom the news that it was Angela, that we had found her.
I got the phone call, and I was just numb. It was done. It was over. And my baby was gone.
My heart broke literally in half because of it. It just sucks that somebody just take her life like that. She was so young.
As Angela's loved ones continue to grieve, detectives kick the investigation into high gear.
Now that their missing persons investigation has become a homicide, detectives are more determined than ever to figure out exactly what happened to Angela Rabate.
Sergeant Flynn, he was amazing. Like, he was amazing. Like the empathy that he had towards the situation, the case, it was like, okay, we're gonna get to the bottom of it. It felt like he took it personal. So he started, honing in on Charles.
Have him ready for us. We're on our way back.
Investigators sit down with Charles Outlaw at the Gwinnett County Jail, where he's already in custody on the probation violation.
We didn't tell him initially that we found the body.
Regardless, Charles is clearly feeling the heat.
During the interview, Charles comes across as paranoid and agitated. He claims that people are trying to set him up, and even at one point in the interview, he begins banging on the table to get his point across.
I wish there was a woman, man. I wish I never would have had it, man. That's just how really it is, man. You see what I'm saying? Just real talk, man, because I don't need this in my life right now. I'm already locked up for no reason.
Hoping to get Charles to spill what he knows, detectives finally break the tragic news of Angela's death.
The game's changed a little bit here, okay? We found Angela today. She's dead, okay?
When we told him that we found the body of Angela, Charles Outlaw threw a fit.
Are you all right down there? You want to sit in the chair? You need to take a minute, you can take a minute.
It's a shocking display of emotion, but it strikes the investigators as disingenuous.
He was crying and screaming, and it was all an act. It was overkill.
After letting Charles's explosion die down, investigators continue the interrogation.
This is your opportunity to say, you're the last person to be seen with her. This is your opportunity to clear your name. You understand what I'm saying? I believe I'm just going to exercise my right. You know what I mean? To have an attorney to kind of guide me
You see what I'm saying?
Charles asked for a lawyer and refused to answer any more questions.
That shut the conversation down, but investigators have no doubt in their minds they have the right guy in custody.
Now more convinced than ever that Charles is Angela's killer, investigators start digging for more evidence to prove it.
As they interview more and more of Angela's friends, detectives are eventually put in touch with a guy named Paul Jacobs.
Appreciate you calling me back.
Yeah, this is crazy right now. This is really crazy.
He told me over the phone that he had met Charles the week before, that he didn't really like Charles.
I do not like him. This guy is scary.
Paul says on March 30th, the day after Angela went missing, he came face to face with Charles that afternoon.
He had been at a car wash the day after Angela disappeared, and while he was there, he immediately recognized Charles Outlaw.
He was looking like he had just struck oil on Sunday.
Oh, like he had gone out and bought a bunch of new clothes?
Yeah.
According to Paul, Charles was acting incredibly odd.
Paul noticed that Charles was detailing every part of his car.
This guy, he was uneasy. He was honestly looking around. He wouldn't sit down for nothing. For like 45 minutes. They were detailing the hell out of his car. They were doing everything.
Paul Jacobs told me that Charles was very insistent on the employees cleaning the inside of the car, just being overbearing about how he wanted the car cleaned.
Paul said that Charles was also flashing lots of cash, mostly small bills.
He says he was tipping the staff at the car wash tons of money.
This dude tipped these kids like crazy. It was just something that was so strange. And this dude was in there spending way too much money just by seeing them and the way he was acting. Something's not right.
Charles was the last person to be seen with Angela. Now, the following day after she was missing, he was cleaning the car, wearing brand new clothing.
They also have to wonder if the cash he was throwing around could have been Angela's tips from the party on Friday night.
Those were all, red flags for us. Okay, there's something going on here.
All right, thank you.
All right.
All right, bye-bye.
And when investigators file a warrant to search Charles's vehicle, they uncover another unsettling piece of information.
Mr. Outlaw's car. It was a rent-a-car.
Who in their right mind cleans a rental car very well prior to turning it in, knowing the rental car company is going to clean it also in detail? So that's a very suspicious act to go along with everything else.
They immediately confiscate the car and have it analyzed by their forensics team.
This was the same car that we knew that he had driven Angela in the night that she went missing. We were able to find the gunshot residue on the roof of the car that indicated that a gunshot had gone off inside the car. Although Charles tried to clean the car out and detail it and get rid of any evidence that was in there, he forgot to clean the roof of the car.
It's damning evidence, but investigators are about to get an even bigger slam dunk.
This is Detective Ross.
They received word that Charles's roommate wants to speak with them.
Charles had actually confessed to him that he had killed Angela.
Gwinnett County detectives have zeroed in on Charles Outlaw as the prime suspect in Angela Rabate's murder.
The evidence against him is just piling up at this point. Not only was he the last person to be with Angela before she disappeared, but he was also seen getting his car detailed the day after she went missing. And police found gun residue on the roof of that same vehicle.
But investigators are about to get another slam dunk.
This is Detective Ross.
They received word that Charles's roommate wants to speak with them.
You kidding me?
Charles had actually confessed to him that he had killed Angela.
When detectives sit down with Charles's roommate, Willie Daniels, he doesn't hold back.
So it's real serious.
Willie tells the police that on the night Angela went missing, Charles Outlaw woke him up in the early morning hours to make a confession.
Hey, wake up.
He looked kind of pained, It looked like there's something like wrong, something like seriously wrong, something ain't right at all.
What's going on?
Charles Outlaw told him that he'd had a struggle with Angela, that she had a gun.
His exact words was, "Him and the old girl that he got into it was about something. They were arguing. He had some little gun or something, and he said they was kind of wrestling over it, and accidentally went off. He was just like, man, I think I'm gonna kill old girl with this gun." I'm like, what?
So that the words he used?
Yeah, he was like, if you don't kill, I think I don't kill things.
After confessing, Willie says Charles became terrified at the idea of being caught.
I cannot go back to prison, man. Like, I can't.
Willie says that Charles started to panic and he jumped up and started stripping off his clothes, saying that he needed to get rid of the evidence.
And he was just like, man, you know, I gotta take my clothes, I just on my clothes. And he started talking about, he was just, he's in the days, you know, he don't know what's going on. So he's real panicking. He's talking to me like, man, I don't know what I'm doing.
Willie says that's when Charles turned on him.
You got my back, right?
Yeah, I got your back. He threatened Willie that he would have some sort of harm done to him or his family were he to tell law enforcement what Charles Outlaw had confessed to him.
He trying to tell me, like, man, don't say that to nobody, man. Like I told you, he threatened my family, he told me he knows my baby mother, he know where everybody stay at.
Detectives eventually confront Willie and ask if he helped Charles get rid of the body or the murder weapon, but he denies it.
He confronted me, like, all that I just told you, that's what he got off his chest. After that, I didn't go digging, like, hey, so what did you do with this? What did you do with that? So I was just kind of like, me just knowing that was just enough.
You didn't ask for your help?
He asked my help on nothing.
Willie says he wished he had come forward earlier, but he was afraid of what Charles might do to his family.
With Charles now incarcerated on the drug charges, Willie felt safer giving a statement to police.
And with Willie's statement in tow, investigators believe they have everything they need to charge Charles with Angela's murder.
At this point, Charles Outlaw was then arrested at the jail for the murder of Angela Rabate.
We charged him with murder, felony murder, and concealing the death of a person.
But obtaining justice for Angela Rabate will be easier said than done.
We finally get a court date for August in 2016, and all of a sudden, they declare a mistrial.
In the spring of 2016, Gwinnett County Police have finally charged Charles Outlaw for the murder of 26-year-old single mother Angela Rabate.
I can remember the phone call like it was yesterday when I finally got the call saying that they were charging him. And we were actually on a car trip going to California, and we just pulled over the car and screamed for joy.
On August 15th, 2016, Charles's murder trial begins.
Fast forward, we finally get a court date for August in 2016. The first day of court, we're sitting there and it's hard. It's hard seeing him in court. It's hard knowing that we're about to relive our worst nightmare through all of this.
He came into trial, you know, with the glasses on and, you know, very postured. He had no one. There was no one sitting on his side. There was absolutely not one person there for him at all.
But just as the prosecution is getting started, the trial faces a setback.
They get into testimony and all of a sudden they declare a mistrial from something that supposedly had been agreed upon pre-trial.
In this case, it was agreed by both parties that the jury should not hear evidence of Charles Outlaw's prior criminal activity or the reason that he was arrested for having a small amount of drugs on him during the search for Angela. But one of the recordings of Outlaw talking to a detective unfortunately included mention that he had been on probation in the past.
For Angela's loved ones and Gwinnett County law enforcement alike, the mistrial is a crushing blow.
And that was very concerning because a lot of times cases are not retried after a mistrial.
It was devastating to me. I didn't know if this was a sign of the things to come, that he was gonna get away with this. So I'm now wondering, are we even gonna get justice for my baby?
We were worried. We felt like, okay, well, if this happens, what if Angie's life is just gonna go in vain because like this man who killed her is out, you know, living his best life.
Matt Akoff was an angel, the DA, because he was like, Judy, we will do whatever we can to get this back on the calendar during this next week.
And Matt makes good on his promise.
Fortunately, we were able to tee it right back up for trial.
They did it. They pulled it off. They got a new jury impaneled and went ahead and proceeded with the trial. We started all over the next week.
The defense described the prosecution's case as a spaghetti prosecution. He claimed that we were just throwing things against the wall to see what would stick. I explained to a jury that this is like when a 2-year-old eats spaghetti and everything sticks to the wall. It all pointed towards Charles Outlaw.
The state accepts that the first part of Charles' story is true, that he and Angela really did get into a fight on the drive back to Gwinnett County.
Charles's own admission is that they got into an argument because he had to drive all the way across the city to get her.
But prosecutors believe there was more to the argument than that.
Charles wanted to be romantically involved with Angela, but she didn't want to have anything to do with him.
After everything that I've done for you, this is how you gonna do me?
I don't owe you anything, Charles.
She was smart. She was resourceful. So if Charles was offering her rides to and from this and that, she would do it. But that didn't mean she was gonna be his girlfriend or anything like that.
And he believed she was using him for rides and other things without being willing to grow their relationship.
I'll just get somebody else to give me rides from now on.
When she said there were other guys waiting in line, he snapped.
You playing with me this whole time, setting me up.
That's not the case, Charles.
Prove.
Prosecutors also concede that Angela may have very well drawn her pistol to protect herself, but they assert that the injury that killed her is not consistent with an accident.
There was just no way that this could have been an accident, not with a press contact type wound on the back of the head.
Instead of seeking help, Charles dumped Angela's body in the nearby town of Lilburn and tried to cover up the crime.
He even participated in the search efforts when he knew all along where he'd hidden her body.
At the end of a week-long trial, the jury retires to deliberate.
I was so nervous. I've never been so nervous in my life.
We just cried and we prayed and we just, hoped that the jury would do the right thing. This is crazy, but when the jury went to deliberate, we seen like 20 yellow butterflies flying around the street. And I was like, that's Angie. We're gonna get justice.
After several hours of deliberation, the jury returns with their verdict.
The jury finds Charles guilty on all charges.
Charles Outlaw was sentenced to life in prison plus an additional 15 years for hiding her body.
It was what we needed. It was what we needed. We got our justice.
I was thankful that we were able to give Angie the justice that she deserved. And for him to be given life without the possibility of parole. Plus 15 years. That was like icing on the cake.
Yet even with the case finally closed, the pain of losing Angela still lingers on for her loved ones.
Angie was on the verge of getting what she wanted in life, of going for her goals and actually accomplishing them. That she was so close.
I feel like it was a fatal attraction. Charles was infatuated with Angie. When he realized that those feelings weren't reciprocated, he didn't feel valued as a man, and this is what caused him to do that.
As human beings, I think we are inclined to trust people and put our trust into those people that we feel comfortable with. But Charles was not someone that Angela could trust. So I think this is a cautionary tale that trust is earned.
The takeaway from this is watch the company that you keep.
The world lost a beautiful light. Someone that would lift you up. She did for me. She was my rock. She was my comfort. And she was the sunshine and the brightness that I don't see anymore.
I want people to know that she was a great mother. She wasn't what her job defined her as. She was doing this for her daughter so she could provide for her child. Angela was amazing.
On the afternoon of October 3rd, SIL 1984, 9-year-old Christine Jessup left her family's home in Queensville, Ontario, to walk to a nearby convenience store. She was expected to return home shortly, but when she did not, her family became concerned. What initially appeared to be a child who was simply running late quickly developed into one of Canada's most significant missing child investigations. Local police responded rapidly after Christine was reported missing. Officers searched the surrounding roads, fields, wooded areas, and nearby properties, while volunteers from the community joined the effort. Friends, neighbors, firefighters, and other emergency personnel participated in an extensive search that continued through the evening and into the following days. Public appeals encouraged anyone who might have seen Christine or observed unusual activity in the area to contact investigators. As the search expanded, investigators began documenting Christine's known movements on the day she disappeared. They interviewed family members, classmates, neighbors, store employees, and motorists who had traveled through the area. Detectives carefully established a timeline using witness statements and available physical evidence. Although numerous tips were received, no immediate lead explained what had happened after Christine left home. On October 31st, SIL 1984, nearly 4 weeks after her disappearance, Christine's body was discovered in a wooded area near Sunderland, Ontario, approximately 50 kilometers from her home. The discovery transformed the investigation from a missing person search into a homicide investigation. Crime scene specialists documented the location, collected physical evidence, photographed the scene, and preserved biological material using the forensic procedures available at the time. Those preservation efforts would later become critically important, although investigators could not yet know how significantly forensic science would evolve over the following decades. The investigation rapidly became one of the largest homicide inquiries in Ontario. Detectives from multiple units coordinated interviews, examined physical evidence, reviewed vehicle sightings, and followed hundreds of public tips. Investigators reconstructed Christine's final known movements while exploring numerous possible leads. Every reported sighting, unusual vehicle, or suspicious encounter was assessed to determine whether it could assist in identifying the person responsible. The case attracted extensive media attention throughout Canada. Newspapers, radio broadcasts, and television reports kept the public informed about the investigation and encouraged additional witnesses to come forward. As often occurs in major investigations, the volume of information available to police increased dramatically. Detectives were required to distinguish reliable evidence from speculation while maintaining the integrity of the investigation. From today's perspective, the early stages of the Jessup investigation also illustrate the limitations of forensic science in 1984. DNA profiling had not yet become available for criminal investigations. Investigators relied on crime scene examination, witness interviews, trace evidence analysis, fingerprints where available, and other established forensic techniques. Even so, they carefully preserved biological evidence according to professional standards, a decision that would eventually prove essential decades later. The disappearance and death of Christine Jessup profoundly affected communities across Ontario. Beyond the immediate investigation, the case prompted discussions about child safety, missing person response procedures, and investigative coordination. Although investigators worked continuously to identify the offender, the evidence available during the initial stages did not immediately reveal who was responsible. The investigation would continue for many years, eventually becoming one of the most significant criminal cases in Canadian legal history, not only because of the eventual identification of the offender through advances in DNA science, but also because it exposed important lessons about wrongful convictions, evidence preservation, and the evolution of forensic investigation. During the afternoon and evening of October 3rd, SIL 1984, the disappearance of 9-year-old Christine Jessup rapidly shifted from what initially appeared to be a delayed return home into a major missing child investigation. According to the public record, Christine had left her family's residence in Queensville, Ontario, intending to walk to a nearby convenience store. When she failed to return within the expected time, members of her family became increasingly concerned. After efforts to locate her independently proved unsuccessful, police were notified, and officers began treating the situation as an active missing person case. The first priority for investigators was to determine Christine's confirmed movements. Officers interviewed family members to establish the timeline of the day, including when she had left the house, what she had been wearing, where she intended to go, and whether she had mentioned meeting anyone. Detectives also sought to identify the last verified sighting of Christine and determine whether anyone had observed her walking along the route to the store or returning home. These early interviews formed the foundation of the investigation and were carefully documented for later comparison as additional information became available. Local police immediately began searching the area surrounding Christine's home. Officers examined roadsides, nearby fields, wooded areas, drainage ditches, and properties along the route she was believed to have taken. Search efforts expanded quickly as firefighters, volunteers, and other emergency personnel joined the operation. Community members organized coordinated searches of accessible land, while police maintained responsibility for directing investigative activities and documenting locations that had already been examined. As daylight faded, search teams continued working under increasingly difficult conditions, using flashlights and vehicles to cover as much ground as possible. Because missing child investigations require rapid action, investigators also began checking locations beyond the immediate neighborhood. Officers contacted nearby police services, distributed descriptions of Christine and her clothing, and asked patrol units to remain alert for possible sightings. Information was shared with transportation agencies and neighboring jurisdictions in case she had traveled farther than initially expected or had been seen elsewhere. Although no confirmed sightings emerged during these early hours, the process of notifying surrounding agencies reflected standard investigative practice in serious missing person cases. Witness identification became another important priority. Detectives canvassed homes and businesses near Christine's expected route, asking residents whether they had seen a young girl matching her description or noticed unusual activity during the afternoon. Employees at the convenience store were interviewed to determine whether Christine had arrived there that day or whether anyone recalled seeing her nearby. Investigators also spoke with motorists, delivery drivers, and individuals working outdoors who might have been in a position to observe events along local roads. Each statement was recorded and later compared with others to establish a reliable sequence of events. As public awareness increased, police established procedures for receiving information from the community. Telephone lines were made available for tips, and investigators encouraged anyone with potentially relevant observations to come forward. In high-profile investigations, the volume of information often increases rapidly, requiring detectives to assess each report carefully before determining whether additional investigative work is warranted. While many tips ultimately prove unrelated, investigators generally evaluate them systematically because even apparently minor observations can become significant when considered alongside other evidence. The search also involved examination of physical locations that might provide evidence of Christine's movements. Investigators looked for personal belongings, signs of disturbance, footprints, tire impressions, or other trace evidence that could indicate where she had traveled or whether another person had been involved. Crime scene documentation principles required officers to preserve any potentially significant evidence while recording its location and condition. Even if no immediate conclusions could be drawn, preserving physical evidence ensured that it would remain available for future forensic examination. Throughout the initial stages of the investigation, detectives worked to distinguish verified facts from assumptions. Establishing an accurate timeline depended upon confirming witness observations rather than relying on speculation. Investigators therefore sought corroboration wherever possible, comparing independent accounts to identify points of agreement and inconsistencies requiring further inquiry. This careful approach reflected the importance of maintaining objectivity during rapidly developing investigations. Media organizations soon began reporting on the disappearance, broadcasting descriptions of Christine and appealing for public assistance. These reports expanded public awareness throughout Ontario and generated additional calls from individuals who believed they might have relevant information. Police balanced the need to inform the public with the need to protect investigative integrity, releasing information considered necessary to encourage witnesses while withholding details that might later assist in evaluating the credibility of statements or confessions. As the search continued over subsequent days, investigators broadened both the geographic scope and the investigative strategies employed. Search teams revisited locations under different lighting and weather conditions, recognizing that visibility and environmental factors could influence what might be discovered. Specialized personnel and equipment were incorporated as resources became available, and investigators continued reviewing incoming information for new leads. The absence of confirmed sightings after Christine's disappearance increased concern among investigators, who recognized that prolonged missing child cases require sustained coordination across multiple investigative functions. The investigation also reflected the forensic capabilities available in 1984. Crime scene specialists documented physical evidence through photography, sketches, measurements, and written reports. Trace evidence such as fibers, hairs, soil, and biological material was collected where appropriate and preserved according to established laboratory procedures. Although forensic DNA profiling had not yet entered routine criminal investigation, evidence preservation remained a professional priority because investigators understood that scientific techniques continued to evolve. Maintaining the integrity of physical evidence ensured that future examinations could be conducted if improved analytical methods became available. As days passed without locating Christine, concern within the community continued to grow. Schools, local organizations, and volunteers remained engaged in search efforts while police pursued every credible lead. Investigators reviewed witness statements repeatedly, searching for patterns or overlooked details that might clarify Christine's final known movements. Despite extensive efforts, no single investigative lead explained her disappearance during these early stages. The initial phase of the Jessup investigation demonstrates several principles that continue to guide missing child investigations today: rapid reporting, immediate search operations, systematic witness interviews, careful documentation, evidence preservation, and cooperation among police, emergency services, and the public. Although the investigation would later become notable for developments occurring many years afterward, its earliest days were characterized by methodical police work carried out under considerable public attention and uncertainty. Those first investigative steps established the documentary and forensic record that would remain central to the case as it continued through subsequent decades. Following the intensive search efforts conducted during the first days after Christine Jessup's disappearance, investigators entered a phase focused on systematically expanding the investigation while continuing to evaluate every available lead. Missing child investigations often evolve rapidly from immediate search operations to comprehensive criminal inquiries when repeated efforts fail to locate the missing person. In October 1984, detectives from the York Regional Police, supported by other agencies as necessary, continued assembling information intended to establish Christine's movements, identify potential witnesses, and determine whether any evidence suggested criminal involvement. One of the investigation's principal objectives was to construct the most accurate possible timeline of the afternoon on which Christine disappeared. Detectives reviewed every known activity preceding her departure from home and carefully documented witness accounts describing her clothing, intended destination, and expected route. Investigators revisited witnesses when appropriate, recognizing that individuals sometimes recall additional details after reflecting on events or discussing them with family members. While memory can become less reliable over time, prompt follow-up interviews were considered an important component of major investigations because they allowed detectives to clarify earlier statements and resolve inconsistencies before they became more difficult to evaluate. Investigators also examined the physical geography surrounding Queensville and neighboring communities. Maps were used to identify roads, walking routes, wooded areas, agricultural land, drainage systems, and other locations that could be relevant to the investigation. Search coordinators documented which areas had already been examined to avoid unnecessary duplication while ensuring that potentially significant locations were not overlooked. Repeated searches of selected locations reflected established investigative practice rather than an assumption that earlier efforts had been inadequate. Changes in weather, lighting, vegetation, or search techniques can affect what investigators are able to observe during different stages of an operation. Public participation remained an important aspect of the investigation. Community volunteers continued assisting organized search efforts under police direction, while investigators received additional information through telephone tip lines and direct contact with witnesses. Detectives evaluated each report individually, comparing it against established facts before determining whether further investigation was required. In large investigations, many reported sightings ultimately prove unrelated, but investigators generally document and assess them because apparently insignificant observations may later assume importance when considered alongside new evidence. Media coverage expanded as newspapers, radio stations, and television broadcasters reported on the continuing search. Official police statements emphasized verified information regarding Christine's disappearance, while encouraging anyone with relevant knowledge to contact investigators. Law enforcement agencies generally exercise caution when releasing investigative details during active cases. Information known only to investigators may later assist in evaluating witness credibility, testing suspect statements, or confirming the authenticity of future admissions. Consequently, public communications typically balance transparency with the need to preserve investigative integrity. As days passed, investigators continued interviewing individuals who lived, worked, or traveled through the area. Detectives sought information from residents, business owners, motorists, school personnel, delivery drivers, and others who might have observed unusual activity. Interviews followed structured investigative procedures designed to establish precise times, locations, descriptions, and observations rather than relying on general impressions. Investigators compared independent witness accounts to identify areas of agreement while examining discrepancies requiring additional inquiry. The investigation also involved careful examination of physical evidence whenever available. Crime scene specialists documented any potentially relevant materials using photography, measurements, written reports, and evidence collection procedures consistent with forensic standards of the period. Trace evidence, including fibers, hairs, soil samples, and biological material, could be collected if circumstances warranted. Although DNA profiling had not yet become available for routine criminal investigations, preserving physical evidence remained essential because laboratory science continued developing and future analytical techniques could potentially provide additional information. Throughout this stage of the investigation, detectives considered multiple possibilities regarding Christine's disappearance without prematurely adopting a single investigative theory. Maintaining objectivity is a fundamental principle of criminal investigation, particularly during the early phases of a case when available information remains incomplete. Investigators therefore examined evidence that might support or contradict various hypotheses while continuing to gather additional facts. This approach reduces the risk of overlooking important information by focusing too narrowly on one explanation before sufficient evidence exists. Coordination among investigative units became increasingly important as the inquiry expanded. Detectives responsible for witness interviews, evidence management, search operations, and intelligence gathering regularly exchanged information to ensure that new findings were incorporated into the broader investigation. Supervisors reviewed investigative priorities, assigned follow-up inquiries, and monitored the status of outstanding leads. Such coordination helps maintain consistency across large investigations involving numerous personnel and substantial volumes of information. Investigators also began compiling comprehensive case files documenting every aspect of the inquiry. Interview summaries, search records, photographs, maps, laboratory requests, correspondence, and administrative memoranda were organized to support continuing investigative work. Detailed documentation serves several purposes. It allows investigators to review earlier findings, prevents duplication of completed tasks, facilitates communication among investigators, and preserves institutional knowledge should personnel changes occur. In long-term investigations, comprehensive records often become as valuable as physical evidence itself. By the end of October 1984, the investigation reached a significant turning point when Christine Jessup's body was discovered in a wooded area near Sunderland, Ontario, approximately 50 kilometers from Queensville. The discovery fundamentally altered the focus of police activity. Search operations concluded, and the investigation formally transitioned into a homicide inquiry. Crime scene investigators secured the location, documented the scene extensively through photography and measurements, and collected physical evidence according to established forensic procedures. Biological samples and other trace evidence were carefully preserved for laboratory examination using the scientific methods available at the time. The recovery of the body expanded the scope of forensic investigation. Pathologists and forensic specialists conducted examinations intended to determine the cause and manner of death, estimate relevant timelines, and identify any physical evidence that might assist investigators. Laboratory analyses available in 1984 included examinations of trace materials, serological testing, hair and fiber comparisons, and other forensic techniques then considered standard practice. Although these methods lacked the individualizing power later provided by DNA profiling, they remained important investigative tools capable of generating leads and excluding certain possibilities. The discovery also intensified public interest in the investigation. media coverage shifted from reporting on a missing child search to documenting an active homicide investigation. Police continued requesting assistance from the public while emphasizing the importance of providing factual information rather than speculation. Investigators understood that public attention could generate valuable leads but could also produce rumors requiring careful verification. Maintaining investigative objectivity remained essential as the inquiry entered its next phase. From a historical perspective, the early investigation illustrates both the strengths and limitations of criminal investigation during the mid-1980s. Detectives employed systematic search methods, comprehensive witness interviews, careful evidence preservation, and multidisciplinary forensic examination using the best techniques then available. At the same time, important scientific developments, most notably forensic DNA profiling, had not yet entered routine investigative practice. Nevertheless, the decision to preserve biological evidence according to professional standards would later prove critical, allowing future investigators to apply technologies that were still years away from practical use when the investigation first began. Following the discovery of Christine Jessup's body on October 31st, 1984, the investigation entered a more complex and resource-intensive stage. What had begun as a missing child search became a homicide investigation requiring the coordinated efforts of detectives, forensic specialists, pathologists, prosecutors, and laboratory personnel. Investigators sought to answer several fundamental questions: how the crime had occurred, whether the location where the body was found was the primary crime scene or a secondary deposition site, whether physical evidence could identify the offender, and whether witness information could establish movements associated with the crime. Each question required careful analysis based on available evidence rather than assumption. The wooded location where Christine's body was discovered was immediately secured to preserve the integrity of the scene. Crime scene investigators documented the area through extensive photography, measurements, sketches, and written observations before evidence was collected. Maintaining an accurate record of the scene's condition was considered essential because every subsequent forensic examination depended upon understanding where and how evidence had originally been located. Investigators recorded environmental conditions, terrain features, vegetation, access routes, and the position of physical evidence. This documentation allowed forensic specialists and later investigators to reconstruct the scene even after it had been released. One important consideration involved determining whether the location represented the place where the crime occurred or whether the body had been transported there after death. Investigators examined the surrounding area for signs of disturbance, vehicle access, footprints, tire impressions, and trace evidence that might clarify how the site had been used. They also evaluated whether environmental conditions had altered or degraded physical evidence during the weeks between Christine's disappearance and the discovery of her body. Such assessments are standard components of homicide investigations because they influence both forensic interpretation and investigative strategy. The postmortem examination conducted by forensic pathologists formed another central element of the investigation. Pathologists documented injuries, collected biological samples, and recorded medical findings relevant to determining the cause and manner of death. Additional samples were preserved for laboratory testing according to the forensic standards of the period. Although the scientific techniques available in 1984 differed substantially from those used today, investigators recognized the importance of preserving biological evidence carefully in case future examinations became necessary. This practice reflected established forensic principles, emphasizing preservation even when immediate analytical capabilities were limited. Laboratory scientists simultaneously examined trace evidence recovered from the scene and during the postmortem examination. Depending on the nature of available material, analyses could include hair comparison, fiber examination, soil analysis, serological testing, and microscopic evaluation of trace materials. Before forensic DNA profiling became widely available, serology, the study of blood and other bodily fluids, provided investigators with limited but potentially useful information regarding biological evidence. While these methods generally could not identify a specific individual with the precision of later DNA analysis, they sometimes assisted investigators by excluding certain possibilities or identifying characteristics relevant to the investigation. The detectives also intensified efforts to identify individuals who might have had information about Christine's movements on October 3, 1984. Witnesses interviewed during the missing person investigation were contacted again to clarify timelines and verify previous statements. Investigators sought to establish Christine's activities throughout the day, identify anyone who may have encountered her, and determine whether unusual vehicles or unfamiliar individuals had been observed in the area. Re-interviewing witnesses is common in major investigations because additional information may emerge as memories are reviewed or new investigative questions develop. The geographic scope of the investigation expanded considerably following the discovery of the body. Investigators examined locations associated with Christine's disappearance, the route she was believed to have taken, and the area where her body was found. They also considered transportation routes connecting these locations and reviewed reports from neighboring jurisdictions for information that might indicate related criminal activity. Although each lead required independent verification, detectives recognized that understanding geographic relationships could assist in reconstructing the sequence of events. Case management became increasingly important as the volume of information grew. Large homicide investigations often generate thousands of pages of reports, numerous witness statements, physical exhibits, photographs, laboratory records, and investigative memoranda. Supervisors established procedures for organizing this information so that investigators could retrieve documents efficiently, monitor outstanding tasks, and compare evidence obtained from different sources. Effective case management reduces the likelihood that significant information will be overlooked as investigations become more complex. Investigators remained cautious when evaluating witness information. Human memory can be affected by the passage of time, media coverage, and discussions with others. Consequently, detectives attempted to corroborate witness accounts through independent evidence whenever possible. Physical evidence, documented timelines, and multiple consistent observations generally provided stronger support than isolated recollections. This methodical approach reflected accepted investigative practice aimed at minimizing the influence of speculation or inaccurate recollection. Public appeals for information continued throughout the investigation. Police encouraged anyone possessing relevant information, regardless of how insignificant it might appear, to contact investigators. Community cooperation remained important because individuals sometimes recall observations only after hearing additional information released during an investigation. At the same time, detectives carefully evaluated each tip before assigning investigative resources, recognizing that high-profile cases often generate large numbers of reports that ultimately prove unrelated. As the investigation progressed, detectives examined whether the available evidence suggested connections to other offenses or known individuals. Such comparisons required careful analysis and objective evaluation. Investigators avoided drawing conclusions unsupported by evidence, instead documenting similarities and differences while continuing to gather additional information. Maintaining investigative neutrality remained essential because premature assumptions can inadvertently influence later decision-making. From the perspective of modern forensic science, this stage of the investigation illustrates both the capabilities and limitations of criminal investigation during the mid-1980s. Detectives employed comprehensive crime scene documentation, systematic witness interviews, laboratory analysis, and coordinated investigative management using the best available methods. However, the absence of routine forensic DNA profiling limited the ability to identify individuals from biological evidence. Investigators therefore relied more heavily on traditional investigative techniques, supported by forensic examinations that could narrow possibilities but often could not conclusively identify an unknown offender. The careful preservation of evidence during this period would later become one of the investigation's defining characteristics. Biological samples, documentation, photographs, and physical exhibits remained available for future scientific examination as forensic technology advanced. At the time, investigators could not predict the specific methods that would eventually become available, but adherence to professional evidence preservation standards ensured that future investigators would inherit material capable of supporting additional analysis. This commitment to thorough documentation and preservation represents one of the lasting lessons of the early Jessup investigation and continues to inform contemporary homicide investigations where the possibility of future scientific advances remains an important consideration. Following the extensive forensic examinations and the initial wave of witness interviews, investigators entered a prolonged period of evidence review and lead development. By late 1984 and into the following months, the investigation had generated a substantial quantity of material, including witness statements, search records, crime scene documentation, laboratory reports, maps, photographs, and physical exhibits. The detectives were now responsible for organizing this information into a coherent investigative framework while continuing to pursue new leads. As in many major homicide investigations, progress depended less on dramatic discoveries than on the careful comparison of individual pieces of evidence collected over time. One of the principal tasks during this phase was verifying the accuracy of the investigative timeline. Detectives compared statements obtained from family members, neighbors, store employees, motorists, and other witnesses who had been interviewed during the initial search. Investigators examined the consistency of reported times, locations, and observations, recognizing that witness recollections can vary and may change as additional information becomes publicly known. Whenever possible, statements were compared with objective records and with one another to identify areas of agreement as well as discrepancies requiring further investigation. The investigative team also reviewed information generated during the search operation itself. Search coordinators maintained records documenting which locations had been examined, by whom, and under what conditions. These records helped investigators determine whether additional searches might be warranted or whether new information justified revisiting previously examined areas. Such reviews reflected established investigative practice rather than any assumption that earlier searches had been inadequate. Environmental conditions, seasonal changes, and new witness information can all affect the value of repeated searches in major investigations. Physical evidence remained a central focus throughout this stage. Forensic laboratories continued examining materials collected during the investigation using the scientific techniques available in the mid-1980s. At the time, laboratory examinations commonly included trace evidence analysis, serological testing, microscopic comparisons, and other established forensic methods. Although these techniques lacked the discriminatory power later provided by DNA profiling, they remained important tools for evaluating physical evidence, excluding certain possibilities, and identifying areas requiring additional inquiry. Evidence management procedures were particularly important because of the size and complexity of the investigation. Each physical exhibit required documentation describing where it had been collected, who had handled it, how it had been packaged, and where it had been stored. Maintaining a complete chain of custody ensured that evidence remained suitable for future forensic examination and, if necessary, for presentation during judicial proceedings. Careful evidence management also reduced the risk of contamination or loss, preserving the integrity of the investigation over time. Investigators continued receiving information from members of the public. As media coverage expanded across Ontario, additional individuals contacted police with observations they believed might be relevant. Detectives documented these reports systematically, assigning follow-up inquiries where appropriate. While many tips could not ultimately be substantiated, investigators generally evaluated them individually rather than dismissing them outright. Major investigations often require balancing limited investigative resources with the need to consider information from a wide range of sources. Throughout this period, detectives also assessed whether the available evidence indicated connections with other reported crimes. Such comparative analysis required careful attention to factual similarities while avoiding unsupported conclusions. Investigators examined reported timelines, geographic factors, and documented evidence to determine whether any objective links existed. Comparisons of this nature are common in homicide investigations, particularly when investigators seek to establish whether an offense may be isolated or related to other criminal activity. Coordination among investigative personnel remained essential. Detectives responsible for witness interviews, forensic evidence, intelligence gathering, and case management regularly exchanged information to ensure that new findings were incorporated into the broader investigation. Supervisors monitored investigative priorities, reviewed outstanding assignments, and evaluated whether additional resources or specialized expertise might assist particular aspects of the case. Such coordination became increasingly important as the volume of information continued to grow. The investigation also demonstrated the importance of comprehensive record keeping. Every interview, laboratory request, search activity, and investigative decision was documented in written reports. These records served multiple purposes. They allowed investigators to review earlier findings, supported communication among members of the investigative team, and created a permanent record that could be examined years later if new evidence emerged. In complex investigations, thorough documentation often becomes one of the most valuable assets available to future investigators. Media attention remained significant during this stage, and police continued issuing carefully prepared public statements. Investigators encouraged anyone with relevant information to come forward while limiting the release of sensitive details that could compromise the investigation. Withholding certain facts known only to investigators is a long-standing investigative practice because it helps evaluate future witness statements and protects information that may later become important during judicial proceedings. From a contemporary perspective, this phase of the investigation illustrates both the strengths and limitations of criminal investigation before the widespread adoption of forensic DNA profiling. Detectives relied on methodical evidence review, structured witness interviews, forensic examinations, and careful documentation using the best techniques then available. While these methods generated important information, they could not always provide the level of individual identification later made possible by advances in molecular genetics. Despite these scientific limitations, investigators continued preserving biological evidence and other physical exhibits according to professional standards. This decision reflected an understanding that forensic science evolves over time and that evidence unavailable for analysis today may become valuable in the future. Subsequent developments in DNA technology would eventually demonstrate the significance of those preservation efforts. The meticulous handling of evidence during the early investigation ensured that later generations of investigators would have access to materials capable of supporting more advanced scientific examination. In retrospect, this period was characterized by systematic investigative work rather than rapid resolution. Detectives pursued leads, evaluated evidence, documented findings, and maintained the integrity of the investigation despite the absence of definitive scientific answers. Their emphasis on thorough documentation, careful evidence preservation, and objective analysis established a durable investigative record that would remain available for future review. Those professional practices, carried out long before many modern forensic techniques existed, became one of the enduring strengths of the Jessup investigation and a lasting example of why comprehensive investigative procedures remain essential in major criminal cases. As the investigation continued beyond its initial months, detectives faced the challenge common to many major homicide inquiries, maintaining investigative momentum after the most immediate leads had been exhausted. By this stage, officers had conducted extensive searches, interviewed a large number of witnesses, collected physical evidence, and assembled a substantial investigative record. The focus increasingly shifted from rapid response to long-term case management, requiring investigators to reassess existing information while remaining prepared to evaluate new evidence whenever it emerged. A significant part of this work involved reviewing witness statements collected during the earliest stages of the investigation. Detectives compared interviews conducted on different dates, looking for consistencies as well as discrepancies that might warrant clarification. It is standard investigative practice to re-interview witnesses in complex cases, particularly when new information becomes available or when investigators seek to confirm timelines established earlier in the inquiry. These follow-up interviews are not necessarily conducted because investigators believe previous statements were inaccurate, but because additional context or corroborating evidence may improve the overall understanding of events. Investigators also continued to analyze the chronology surrounding Christine Jessup's disappearance. Establishing an accurate timeline remained one of the investigation's central objectives. Detectives sought to identify confirmed sightings, determine when each observation occurred, and evaluate how those reports fit together geographically and chronologically. This process required careful documentation and objective assessment rather than reliance on speculation. Wherever possible, witness accounts were compared with independent evidence to strengthen confidence in the reconstructed timeline. During this period, the investigative team maintained regular contact with forensic laboratories regarding the examination of physical evidence. Laboratory specialists completed analyses using the scientific methods available in the mid-1980s, including serological testing and microscopic examination of trace materials. Such techniques were capable of providing useful investigative information, but they had important limitations. Biological evidence could sometimes be classified into broad categories, yet investigators could not reliably identify a specific individual from that evidence using the technology routinely available at the time. This technological limitation is an important aspect of understanding homicide investigations during the 1980s. Modern audiences are familiar with forensic DNA profiling, but that capability did not become widely available until later in the decade and was not yet part of routine police investigations in Canada when Christine Jessup disappeared. Consequently, investigators relied more heavily on traditional police work, witness interviews, physical evidence, forensic pathology, trace evidence analysis, and systematic comparison of information collected throughout the investigation. Evidence preservation therefore assumed particular importance. Detectives and forensic personnel maintained biological samples, clothing, photographs, laboratory documentation, and other physical exhibits according to accepted procedures. Proper packaging, secure storage, detailed inventories, and documented chain of custody records helped preserve the integrity of these materials. Although investigators could not predict future scientific developments, preserving evidence ensured that additional testing would remain possible if more advanced methods became available in later years. The investigation also required effective management of information received from the public. Major criminal cases often generate hundreds or even thousands of tips. Some originate from eyewitnesses, others from individuals reporting suspicious activity, and still others from members of the public responding to media coverage. Detectives evaluated each report individually, documenting its source, comparing it against established facts, and determining whether additional investigative work was justified. While many reports ultimately proved unrelated, the systematic review of public information remained an essential component of the inquiry. Coordination among different investigative units continued throughout this stage. Detectives responsible for interviews, forensic evidence, intelligence analysis, and administrative case management regularly shared findings through formal reports and case conferences. This collaborative approach helped ensure that information discovered by one investigator could be considered alongside evidence collected by others. Such coordination is particularly important in large investigations where different teams may be examining separate aspects of the same case. Case documentation expanded considerably as the investigation progressed. Investigators maintained detailed records describing interviews, forensic examinations, search activities, correspondence, laboratory requests, and investigative decisions. Comprehensive documentation serves several practical purposes. It creates an organized history of the investigation, allows supervisors to monitor investigative progress, facilitates communication among personnel, and provides future investigators with a complete record of work already completed. In long-term investigations, this documentation often becomes indispensable. Investigators also continued reviewing developments in forensic science and investigative practice. Although DNA profiling was not yet available for routine use, scientific research in molecular genetics was advancing internationally. Law enforcement agencies and forensic laboratories closely monitored these developments, recognizing that future analytical methods might eventually provide opportunities unavailable at the time. As a result, preserving biological evidence remained a priority despite the absence of immediate testing capabilities. Throughout this period, detectives remained committed to maintaining an objective approach, rather than focusing exclusively on a single investigative theory. They continued evaluating evidence based on its reliability and consistency with established facts. This principle is fundamental to criminal investigation. Evidence should guide investigative conclusions, not the reverse. Maintaining this discipline helps reduce the risk of confirmation bias and supports the overall integrity of the investigative process. Public interest in the case remained significant, and police continued communicating with the media through official statements. Investigators encouraged anyone possessing relevant information to come forward while avoiding the release of sensitive investigative details. Protecting certain information known only to investigators can be important for evaluating future witness statements, assessing confessions, and preserving the integrity of potential legal proceedings. This balance between public transparency and investigative confidentiality remains a standard feature of major criminal investigations. Looking back from the perspective of modern forensic science, this stage of the investigation illustrates both the professionalism of the original investigative team and the limitations imposed by the technology of the era. Detectives collected and preserved evidence with care, documented their work thoroughly, coordinated across investigative disciplines, and continued pursuing available leads despite the absence of definitive scientific methods capable of identifying an unknown individual from biological evidence. Those efforts created a comprehensive investigative record that would remain available for future review. The enduring lesson from this phase is that careful investigative practice can retain its value even when immediate answers are unavailable. Thorough documentation, objective evaluation of evidence, secure preservation of physical exhibits, and systematic review of witness information established a foundation that later generations of investigators could revisit as forensic science evolved. In that respect, the early years of the Jessup investigation became an example of how sound investigative procedures can preserve opportunities for future scientific examination, even when the necessary technology has not yet been developed. As the initial phase of the investigation gave way to a longer-term inquiry, investigators increasingly focused on reviewing the information that had already been collected. Major homicide investigations frequently transition into a process of reassessment once the most immediate search efforts and witness interviews have been completed. Rather than assuming that every relevant detail had already been identified, detectives revisited evidence, compared investigative findings, and evaluated whether additional inquiries might clarify unanswered questions. This methodical review was intended to ensure that no significant lead had been overlooked during the intensive early stages of the case. One of the first priorities was to examine the consistency of the investigative timeline. Detectives reviewed interview notes, witness statements, dispatch records, and search logs to confirm the sequence of events surrounding Christine Jessup's disappearance. Establishing an accurate chronology is a fundamental investigative practice because it provides the framework against which all subsequent evidence can be evaluated. Even small adjustments to the timeline can influence decisions about which witnesses require additional interviews or which locations merit further examination. Investigators also reviewed the extensive records created during the initial search operation. Search coordinators had documented the areas examined, the personnel involved, the methods used, and the dates and times of each operation. These records allowed investigators to determine whether particular locations should be revisited in light of newly received information or changing investigative priorities. In large-scale searches, documentation is essential because it helps avoid unnecessary duplication while ensuring that potentially relevant locations are not inadvertently excluded from later review. The management of physical evidence remained another critical responsibility. Every item collected during the investigation was cataloged, packaged, and stored according to established forensic procedures. Chain of custody documentation recorded who handled each exhibit when it was transferred and where it was stored. These records serve both scientific and legal purposes by demonstrating that evidence has been preserved in a manner that protects its integrity throughout the investigation. Maintaining detailed evidence records is particularly important in investigations that may continue for many years. Forensic laboratories continued evaluating materials submitted by investigators using the scientific techniques available during the mid-1980s. Laboratory examinations included analyses appropriate to the evidence recovered, such as microscopic comparisons and serological testing where applicable. While these methods could provide useful investigative information, they were subject to technological limitations that are well recognized today. At the time, forensic scientists could not perform the type of DNA profiling that would later become a routine component of criminal investigations. Consequently, investigators relied on a combination of laboratory findings, witness information, and traditional investigative methods rather than expecting forensic evidence alone to identify an unknown offender. The investigation also required careful management of information received from the public. Following media coverage, police continued receiving telephone calls, letters, and other communications from individuals who believed they possessed relevant information. Detectives evaluated each report individually, documenting its contents and comparing it with existing evidence before determining whether follow-up inquiries were appropriate. Although many public tips ultimately did not advance the investigation, each was assessed systematically because investigators recognized that even seemingly minor observations could become significant when viewed alongside other information. Another important aspect of the investigation involved continued witness contact. Detectives occasionally returned to individuals interviewed during the earliest stages of the case to clarify details or address questions that had emerged during evidence review. Follow-up interviews are a routine investigative practice and reflect the understanding that recollections may become more detailed when witnesses are asked specific questions or when additional context becomes available. Investigators sought to verify factual observations rather than encourage speculation, emphasizing objective information that could be independently assessed. As investigative records expanded, supervisors implemented structured case management procedures to organize the growing volume of material. Reports, photographs, laboratory results, maps, correspondence, and interview summaries were indexed to facilitate efficient retrieval and comparison. Effective record management allows investigators to identify connections among different pieces of information while preserving a clear history of investigative decisions. In complex investigations involving numerous personnel, organized documentation helps maintain continuity even as responsibilities change over time. The case also illustrates the value of multidisciplinary collaboration. Detectives, forensic specialists, pathologists, evidence custodians, and laboratory scientists each contributed distinct forms of expertise. Regular communication among these groups helped ensure that scientific findings were considered alongside witness information and investigative observations. Such collaboration remains a defining feature of major criminal investigations, where no single discipline is sufficient to address every aspect of the inquiry. Throughout this stage, investigators remained mindful of the importance of avoiding premature conclusions. Professional investigative practice emphasizes evaluating evidence objectively and remaining prepared to revise investigative theories if new information emerges. This approach helps reduce the influence of confirmation bias and supports decisions based on verifiable facts rather than assumptions. Maintaining investigative flexibility is especially important in cases where available evidence is incomplete or where scientific capabilities may continue to evolve. The preservation of biological evidence during this period deserves particular attention. Although investigators could not foresee the precise direction of future forensic science, they understood that advances in laboratory techniques were possible. Consequently, biological samples and other physical exhibits were preserved according to accepted standards to ensure they would remain available for future examination. This commitment to evidence preservation reflected established forensic principles and would later prove to be one of the investigation's most significant strengths. Looking back, the early investigative period demonstrates how comprehensive documentation, systematic evidence management, and careful forensic preservation create lasting value in complex criminal investigations. Even when immediate investigative progress is limited, maintaining organized records and preserving physical evidence ensures that future investigators can reassess the case using improved methods and technologies. The work completed during these early years established a reliable investigative foundation that would remain available for continued review as forensic science and investigative practice developed in the decades that followed. As the investigation moved beyond its earliest years, the case entered a stage familiar to many long-term homicide investigations. Immediate search operations had concluded, hundreds of interviews had been conducted, and the available forensic examinations had been completed using the scientific methods of the time. The investigation remained active, but its emphasis shifted toward preserving evidence, reviewing existing information, and evaluating new leads as they emerged. This transition reflected the reality that complex investigations often continue over extended periods, requiring sustained organizational commitment rather than continuous public activity. A central responsibility during this period was maintaining the integrity of the investigative record. Detectives and administrative personnel ensured that reports, witness statements, crime scene photographs, laboratory results, maps, and evidence inventories remained organized and accessible. Proper case management is essential in long-running investigations because it allows future investigators to understand earlier investigative decisions without relying on personal recollection. Comprehensive documentation also reduces the risk that important information will be overlooked when personnel changes occur. As investigators revisited the evidence, they compared witness statements collected at different stages of the investigation. Follow-up reviews were intended to identify consistencies, clarify uncertainties, and determine whether any information had gained new significance when considered alongside other evidence. This process did not assume that previous investigative work had been inadequate. Rather, it reflected standard investigative practice, recognizing that large volumes of information are often understood more clearly after systematic review. The preservation of physical evidence remained a continuing priority. Biological samples, clothing, photographs, trace evidence, and other exhibits were retained under controlled conditions designed to maintain their scientific value. Evidence custodians monitored storage procedures and maintained detailed chain of custody documentation recording every transfer, examination, and storage location. These records ensured that investigators could demonstrate the integrity of physical evidence throughout the life of the investigation. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, forensic science experienced significant technological change. One of the most important developments was the emergence of forensic DNA profiling. Initially introduced in criminal investigations during the second half of the 1980s, DNA analysis gradually became an increasingly reliable method for comparing biological samples. Early applications were limited compared with modern capabilities, but the technology represented a substantial advance over previous serological methods by allowing much more specific comparisons between biological evidence and known reference samples. As DNA technology matured, investigators responsible for unresolved cases across Canada and other countries began assessing whether preserved biological evidence might be suitable for additional testing. Such reviews required careful collaboration between detectives and forensic laboratories. Scientists evaluated the condition of stored evidence, determined whether sufficient biological material remained available, and assessed whether contemporary laboratory methods could produce results that earlier techniques had been unable to obtain. In the Jessup investigation, the careful preservation of evidence meant that biological samples collected during the original investigation remained available for future scientific examination. This outcome illustrates an important principle of forensic practice. Evidence that cannot be fully analyzed using current technology may nonetheless retain significant value if preserved appropriately. Decisions made during the original investigation regarding evidence collection, packaging, documentation, and storage therefore continued to influence investigative possibilities many years later. Investigators also monitored developments in national forensic capabilities. As laboratory procedures became more sophisticated, quality assurance standards improved, accreditation requirements expanded, and analytical methods became increasingly standardized. These institutional developments enhanced confidence in forensic results by promoting consistent scientific practices across laboratories. For investigators reviewing historical cases, improvements in laboratory reliability increased the potential value of preserved evidence. At the same time, detectives continued evaluating new information received from the public. Long-term investigations frequently generate additional witness reports years after the original events. Individuals may recall previously unreported observations, recognize the possible significance of past experiences, or respond to renewed media coverage. Investigators documented each report, compared it with existing evidence, and determined whether further inquiry was warranted. While many reports ultimately proved unrelated, maintaining procedures for evaluating new information remained an important component of case management. The investigation also demonstrates the importance of institutional continuity. Over the years, personnel changes occurred within police services, forensic laboratories, and prosecutorial offices. Detectives retired, supervisors changed assignments, and new investigators assumed responsibility for reviewing historical cases. Comprehensive documentation allowed these transitions to occur without losing the investigative knowledge accumulated during earlier stages of the inquiry. Successive investigators were able to understand prior investigative decisions because detailed records had been maintained from the outset. Another important development during this period involved advances in computerized record management. Police agencies increasingly adopted digital systems for organizing investigative information, allowing case files to become more searchable and accessible. Although much of the original Jessup investigation had been documented in paper records, digitization efforts improved the efficiency with which investigators could review reports, compare witness statements, and locate historical documents. Electronic record management complemented, rather than replaced, the original documentation created during the investigation. Professional training within law enforcement also evolved during these years. Investigators increasingly received instruction in evidence preservation, forensic awareness, interview techniques, and long-term case management informed by advances in forensic science. Cold case investigations became an area of growing professional interest, emphasizing the importance of periodically reviewing unresolved cases as technology advanced. The Jessup investigation reflected many of these broader developments within criminal justice. From a historical perspective, this period highlights the relationship between scientific progress and investigative persistence. Technological advances alone cannot resolve historical investigations unless reliable evidence has been preserved and documented. Conversely, careful investigative work may not immediately produce answers if appropriate scientific methods have not yet been developed. The interaction between these two factors, professional evidence preservation and evolving forensic science, became increasingly important as investigators continued reviewing unresolved cases throughout the late 20th century. By the end of this stage, the investigation remained unresolved, but its evidentiary foundation had been preserved. Physical evidence, investigative records, witness interviews, and forensic documentation continued to exist in a condition suitable for future examination. Although the scientific tools available during the original investigation had reached their practical limits, ongoing advances in forensic genetics suggested that additional opportunities might emerge in the future. The diligence shown in preserving evidence and maintaining comprehensive records ensured that, should new technologies become available, investigators would possess the materials necessary to apply them effectively. This commitment to long-term evidence preservation remains one of the defining characteristics of the early Jessup investigation and continues to serve as an important example in discussions of modern cold case management. The development of forensic DNA analysis represents one of the most significant advances in the history of criminal investigation. Before DNA profiling became available, investigators relied primarily on witness testimony, fingerprints when present, physical trace evidence, blood group analysis, and other forensic methods that could assist investigations but often lacked the ability to identify an individual with a high degree of certainty. During the latter part of the 20th century, advances in molecular genetics transformed this landscape by allowing biological material recovered from crime scenes to be compared with known reference samples using increasingly precise scientific techniques. In Canada, as in many other countries, these developments gradually reshaped homicide investigations, particularly those involving unresolved historical cases. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, contains the genetic information present in nearly every cell of the human body. Although identical twins share essentially the same DNA profile, each person's genetic profile is otherwise unique. This characteristic makes DNA an exceptionally valuable form of forensic evidence when biological material has been recovered and preserved under appropriate conditions. Samples suitable for forensic examination may include blood, saliva, semen, hair containing root tissue, skin cells, or other biological material. The usefulness of any sample depends on its condition, quantity, and the methods available for scientific analysis. The first practical applications of forensic DNA profiling emerged during the mid-1980s. Early techniques demonstrated that biological evidence could distinguish one individual from another with a level of specificity that had not previously been possible. These early methods required relatively large and well-preserved samples, limiting their application in some investigations. Nevertheless, they represented a substantial improvement over serological testing, which generally classified biological evidence into broad groups rather than identifying specific individuals. Canadian forensic laboratories gradually adopted DNA profiling as scientific validation increased and laboratory procedures became standardized. The implementation of DNA analysis required significant investment in specialized equipment, laboratory infrastructure, quality assurance programs, and scientific training. Because forensic evidence often becomes central to criminal proceedings, laboratories also developed rigorous protocols governing sample handling, contamination prevention, documentation, and result verification. These procedures were designed to ensure that forensic conclusions could withstand scientific scrutiny and judicial examination. Throughout the 1990s, improvements in laboratory technology significantly increased the sensitivity of DNA analysis. Polymerase chain reaction, PCR, techniques allowed scientists to amplify very small quantities of DNA, making it possible to analyze biological samples that previously would have been considered insufficient. As analytical methods continued to improve, laboratories became capable of obtaining usable DNA profiles from increasingly limited or degraded biological material. These advances proved especially important in historical investigations where evidence had often been stored for many years. Another major development involved the adoption of short tandem repeat (STANGER) analysis, which became the international standard for forensic DNA profiling. STRANalysis examines specific regions of human DNA that vary among individuals while remaining suitable for reliable laboratory comparison. Standardized analytical methods facilitated cooperation among laboratories and improved the consistency of forensic results. Scientific validation studies confirmed the reliability of these techniques when appropriate quality assurance procedures were followed. In Canada, forensic DNA capabilities expanded alongside improvements in legislation and institutional infrastructure. The establishment of the National DNA Data Bank in 2000 created a centralized system for comparing forensic DNA profiles obtained from crime scenes with profiles lawfully collected under Canadian legislation. The database consists of separate indexes designed for different purposes, including crime scene evidence and profiles collected from certain convicted offenders as authorized by law. Strict legal controls govern the collection, storage, access, and use of DNA information, reflecting the importance of balancing investigative effectiveness with individual privacy rights. The National DNA Data Bank has contributed significantly to Canadian criminal investigations by enabling investigators to identify links between separate crime scenes and, in appropriate circumstances, associate biological evidence with known individuals whose DNA profiles are lawfully included in the database. However, It is important to recognize that the database can only compare profiles already contained within its authorized indexes. If an offender's DNA profile has never been lawfully entered into the database, no match will occur regardless of the quality of the crime scene evidence. Cold case investigations have benefited substantially from advances in DNA technology. Many historical homicide investigations involved biological evidence that was collected before forensic DNA profiling existed. Because investigators preserved this evidence according to accepted forensic standards, later generations of scientists could often re-examine samples using more advanced laboratory methods. Improved analytical sensitivity has enabled laboratories to obtain DNA profiles from evidence previously considered unsuitable for meaningful examination. Consequently, historical investigations once thought unlikely to yield additional forensic information have, in some cases, produced valuable new evidence through reanalysis. Evidence preservation remains one of the most important factors determining whether modern DNA analysis can contribute to historical investigations. Biological material must be collected, packaged, documented, and stored in ways that minimize contamination and environmental degradation. Proper chain of custody documentation ensures that laboratories can establish the integrity of evidence throughout its history. Even highly advanced laboratory methods cannot compensate for evidence that has been irreparably contaminated, lost, or improperly preserved. The evolution of forensic DNA also influenced investigative strategy. Detectives increasingly recognized that unresolved cases should be periodically reviewed as scientific capabilities advanced. Rather than assuming that earlier laboratory examinations represented the final analytical possibilities, investigators began reassessing preserved evidence whenever significant improvements in forensic technology occurred. Many police services established dedicated cold case units responsible for identifying historical investigations that might benefit from renewed scientific examination. Advances in quality assurance accompanied these scientific developments. Modern forensic laboratories operate under comprehensive accreditation systems requiring validated methods, standardized procedures, regular proficiency testing, and detailed documentation. Independent technical review of laboratory results helps ensure scientific reliability and reduces the likelihood of analytical error. These institutional safeguards strengthen confidence in forensic evidence presented during criminal investigations and judicial proceedings. The continuing evolution of DNA analysis has also prompted important legal and ethical discussions. Canadian courts have considered questions regarding the admissibility of scientific evidence, privacy protections, collection authority, and the interpretation of complex forensic results. Legislators and policymakers have likewise addressed issues relating to the management of DNA databases and the responsible use of genetic information. These discussions reflect the broader principle that scientific innovation must develop alongside appropriate legal safeguards and public accountability. From a historical perspective, the development of forensic DNA transformed not only laboratory science, but also the philosophy of long-term criminal investigation. Cases that once depended primarily on witness recollection and circumstantial evidence could now be revisited using objective biological analysis. At the same time, investigators learned that successful application of modern science depends fundamentally upon the quality of earlier investigative work. Careful evidence collection, meticulous documentation, and proper preservation remain indispensable prerequisites for meaningful forensic examination decades later. The experience of Canadian law enforcement demonstrates that forensic progress is cumulative rather than instantaneous. Each advance from early DNA profiling to PCR amplification, straight analysis, improved extraction methods, and enhanced quality assurance expanded the ability of investigators to analyze historical evidence. These scientific developments, combined with systematic evidence, preservation, and comprehensive case documentation, have significantly strengthened the capacity of investigators to review unresolved homicide investigations and evaluate historical evidence using methods unavailable when many of those crimes originally occurred. Investigative genetic genealogy, EG, is one of the most significant developments in forensic investigation since the introduction of DNA profiling in the 1980s. Unlike traditional forensic DNA analysis, which compares crime scene DNA against known individuals or profiles stored in law enforcement databases, IG seeks to identify unknown individuals by examining distant biological relationships through genealogical research. The method combines forensic science, population genetics, historical records, and family history research to generate investigative leads that may not be available through conventional police databases. Although its use has expanded internationally following several high-profile cases, including the identification of suspects in decades-old investigations, Canada has approached EG cautiously, balancing its investigative value with legal, ethical, and privacy considerations. To understand IG, it is important to distinguish it from conventional forensic DNA comparison. Traditional forensic investigations rely primarily on short tandem repeat stranger profiles. Stray analysis examines specific locations within human DNA that vary among individuals but remain suitable for reliable forensic comparison. These profiles are highly effective for determining whether biological samples originated from the same person or from closely related individuals under specific circumstances. However, stray profiles are designed for identification rather than ancestry. If investigators possess an unknown DNA profile from a crime scene but no matching reference profile exists within an authorized forensic database, conventional stray analysis may not identify the source. Investigative genetic genealogy addresses this limitation by using a different type of genetic information. Instead of examining only the relatively small number of strain markers used in forensic identification, laboratories generate a much broader genetic profile containing hundreds of thousands of single nucleotide polymorphisms, commonly known as SUPs. SUP analysis is widely used in medical research, ancestry testing, and population genetics because it provides information regarding distant biological relationships across multiple generations. This broader genetic dataset allows investigators to search for relatives of an unknown individual rather than the individual directly. The investigative process generally begins only after conventional forensic methods have been exhausted. Detectives first confirm that a biological sample suitable for advanced DNA analysis exists and that the evidence has been preserved without contamination. Accredited forensic laboratories then determine whether sufficient DNA can be extracted to produce a high-quality SUP profile. Because historical evidence may be decades old, laboratory scientists often perform additional quality control procedures to verify that the genetic material remains suitable for analysis. Once a SUP profile has been generated, investigators may, where legally authorized, compare it with profiles voluntarily uploaded by individuals to genealogical databases that permit law enforcement access under specific conditions. It is important to note that not all genealogy databases allow such searches. Some prohibit law enforcement access entirely, while others permit it only when users have explicitly chosen to participate in law enforcement matching. Database policies continue to evolve as privacy expectations, legislation, and public attitudes develop. A database search rarely identifies the unknown individual directly. Instead, investigators typically locate one or more genetic relatives, often sharing only a small percentage of DNA. These relatives may be second cousins, third cousins, or even more distant family members. Although such matches do not identify a suspect, they provide genealogists with starting points for reconstructing family trees. Professional genealogists then combine genetic information with historical records such as birth registrations, marriage certificates, census records, obituaries, newspaper archives, immigration documents, military records, cemetery records, and publicly available family histories. Constructing family trees requires systematic historical research. Genealogists identify common ancestors shared by multiple DNA matches and then trace descendant family lines forward through successive generations. This process may involve reviewing thousands of historical records while accounting for name changes, adoptions, migration, remarriages, and incomplete documentation. The objective is not to identify a suspect immediately, but to narrow the range of individuals who could reasonably fit the available genetic relationships, age estimates, geographic factors, and other investigative evidence. At this stage, investigators integrate genealogical findings with conventional police work. Detectives compare potential family members against established case facts, including age, sex, residence history, employment records, travel patterns, and documented opportunities relevant to the investigation. Importantly, genealogical information alone does not establish criminal responsibility. Rather, it generates investigative leads that require independent verification through lawful investigative methods. If investigators identify an individual whose circumstances warrant further inquiry, they seek additional evidence using traditional investigative procedures. This may include reviewing historical records, interviewing witnesses, examining documentary evidence, or obtaining a legally authorized reference DNA sample. In many jurisdictions, investigators collect abandoned DNA from items voluntarily discarded in public places, such as drinking containers or tissues, where permitted by law. That reference sample is then analyzed using conventional forensic stare methods and compared directly with the original crime scene evidence. Only this direct forensic comparison, not genealogical inference, can scientifically establish whether the biological evidence originated from a particular individual. This distinction is fundamental. Investigative genetic genealogy does not itself prove identity. It functions as an investigative intelligence tool that narrows the pool of possible individuals. The final evidentiary conclusion depends upon standard forensic DNA comparison performed under established laboratory protocols. Cortez evaluate the conventional forensic comparison rather than the genealogical research alone. In Canada, the legal environment surrounding IG continues to develop. Canadian investigators have increasingly explored the technique in selected serious criminal investigations, particularly historical homicide and unidentified human remains cases. However, Canadian law enforcement agencies generally employ IG cautiously and under carefully defined legal and ethical frameworks. Privacy legislation, constitutional protections, judicial oversight, and evolving public expectations all influence how and when the technique may be used. Canadian forensic investigators also distinguish clearly between the National DNA Databank and genealogical databases. The National DNA Databank operates under federal legislation and contains forensic DNA profiles collected under specific legal authority. Its purpose differs fundamentally from commercial or public genealogy databases, which are designed primarily for ancestry research and family history. Investigative genetic genealogy does not replace Canada's forensic database system. Rather, it may complement conventional investigative methods in circumstances where authorized forensic database searches produce no identification. Ethical considerations remain central to discussions surrounding IG. One frequently discussed issue concerns informed consent. Individuals who submit DNA to ancestry services may not anticipate that distant relatives could become relevant to criminal investigations years later. Consequently, many genealogy providers have adopted explicit consent mechanisms allowing users to decide whether their genetic information may participate in law enforcement matching. Transparency regarding database policies has become an important component of maintaining public trust. Another consideration involves investigative proportionality. Because IG has the potential to affect individuals who are not themselves suspects, many experts argue that its use should be limited to investigations involving the most serious offenses, particularly homicide, sexual assault, and unidentified human remains. Restricting its application helps balance the public interest in solving major crimes against broader concerns regarding genetic privacy and responsible investigative practice. Scientific quality assurance also remains essential. Laboratories conducting sub-analysis must follow validated analytical procedures, contamination controls, documentation requirements, and independent review processes comparable to those governing traditional forensic DNA testing. Reliable genealogy depends upon accurate laboratory results, comprehensive historical research, and careful interpretation by qualified professionals. Errors in any stage of the process can affect the reliability of investigative leads. Despite these challenges, investigative genetic genealogy has demonstrated considerable value in resolving cases that remained unsolved for decades. Advances in sequencing technology, bioinformatics, and genealogical research continue to improve investigators' ability to generate meaningful leads from preserved biological evidence. At the same time, ongoing legal and ethical discussions ensure that the technique develops within frameworks that respect individual rights while supporting legitimate criminal investigations. The Canadian experience illustrates that IG is neither a replacement for conventional policing nor a universal solution for cold cases. Successful investigations continue to depend upon careful evidence preservation, meticulous documentation, rigorous forensic science, comprehensive historical research, and objective investigative judgment. Genetic genealogy simply adds another tool to this broader investigative framework. When applied responsibly, supported by appropriate legal authority, and combined with traditional investigative methods, it offers the possibility of generating new leads in cases that once appeared beyond the reach of available science, while reinforcing the continuing importance of evidence preservation and scientific integrity in modern criminal investigation. By the early 21st century, forensic DNA analysis had become a routine component of homicide investigations across Canada. Yet investigators continued encountering a recurring problem in historical cases. Biological evidence might yield a complete forensic DNA profile, but no identification could be made because the profile did not match any individual legally represented within existing forensic databases. In such circumstances, investigators possessed reliable scientific evidence but no name associated with it. Investigative genetic genealogy, EGE, emerged as a complementary approach designed to bridge that gap by combining modern genetics with traditional genealogical research. Unlike conventional forensic identification, which asks whether two DNA samples originated from the same individual, investigative genetic genealogy asks a different question. Who are the biological relatives of the unknown person represented by this DNA profile? Answering that question requires scientific methods developed outside traditional forensic laboratories, drawing upon population genetics, historical records, archival research, and family history reconstruction. The process begins with the biological evidence collected during the original criminal investigation. Before any genealogical analysis is considered, forensic scientists must first determine whether the preserved sample remains suitable for modern laboratory examination. Many historical exhibits have been stored for decades, making careful assessment essential. Scientists evaluate DNA quantity, degradation, contamination risk, and overall quality before deciding whether additional analysis is scientifically appropriate. Traditional forensic laboratories generally produce short tandem repeat, Stanger, profiles because these remain the international standard for criminal identification. Stranger profiles are highly effective when investigators possess a comparison sample from a known individual or when a profile matches one already contained within an authorized forensic database. However, stray profiles contain relatively limited genetic information regarding distant biological relationships. Investigative genetic genealogy instead requires analysis of hundreds of thousands of single nucleotide polymorphisms, commonly known as SUPs. These small genetic variations occur throughout the human genome and provide information useful for estimating biological relationships extending across multiple generations. Generating a forensic quality SUP profile often requires additional laboratory procedures beyond those used in conventional criminal investigations. Scientists must ensure that the resulting genetic information accurately represents the biological evidence while minimizing contamination and maintaining documented quality assurance procedures. Once a SUP profile has been produced, investigators may seek authorization to compare it against genealogy databases that explicitly permit law enforcement participation under defined circumstances. Importantly, participation in these databases depends upon user consent and the policies established by each service. Some genealogy platforms prohibit law enforcement access entirely. Others allow users to choose whether their genetic information may be included in searches related to violent crime investigations or unidentified human remains. Canadian investigators operate within this evolving legal and ethical environment while respecting applicable privacy legislation and judicial oversight. A successful database search rarely identifies the unknown individual directly. Instead, investigators frequently discover one or more people sharing relatively small amounts of DNA with the unknown profile. These individuals may be second cousins, third cousins, or even more distant relatives. Although such matches cannot identify an unknown person independently, they provide genealogists with critical starting points for reconstructing extended family relationships. Professional genealogists then undertake detailed historical research. They examine civil registration records, census documents, immigration files, marriage records, birth certificates, obituaries, newspaper archives, military service records, cemetery records, probate files, and other publicly available historical sources. Their objective is to identify common ancestors shared among multiple DNA matches and then trace family lines forward through successive generations. This process often requires substantial historical expertise. Families migrate between provinces and countries. Individuals change surnames through marriage or adoption. Records may contain transcription errors, incomplete information, or conflicting dates. Genealogists therefore compare multiple independent historical sources before reaching conclusions regarding family relationships. Their work resembles historical research as much as forensic science, requiring patience, documentation, and careful evaluation of evidence. As family trees expand, investigators begin narrowing the number of individuals who could plausibly correspond to the unknown DNA profile. age, biological sex, geographic history, and documented life events become increasingly important. The detectives compare genealogical findings with the established facts of the criminal investigation, including known timelines, locations, witness information, and other physical evidence. Genealogy generates investigative possibilities rather than definitive conclusions. At every stage, conventional investigative methods remain essential. Detectives continue reviewing historical records, interviewing witnesses where appropriate, examining documentary evidence, and evaluating information independently of genealogical research. The genealogical analysis serves to prioritize investigative resources rather than replace traditional police work. Every potential identification requires confirmation through established forensic procedures before investigators can draw scientific conclusions. The final scientific confirmation relies upon conventional forensic DNA comparison rather than genealogy itself. Investigators lawfully obtain a reference DNA sample associated with a person of investigative interest, subject to applicable legal standards. That reference sample undergoes standard forensic stray analysis and is compared directly with the original crime scene evidence. Only this comparison can establish whether the biological evidence originated from the individual in question. Genealogical research, therefore, functions as an investigative intelligence tool rather than an evidentiary substitute. Canadian forensic and policing agencies have approached investigative genetic genealogy cautiously because the technique involves genetic information extending beyond the individual under investigation. Legal and ethical questions receive considerable attention. Privacy protections under Canadian law, constitutional safeguards, and evolving judicial interpretation all influence how investigators employ genealogical methods. Agencies generally reserve consideration of EG for investigations involving the most serious offenses, particularly homicide and unidentified human remains, where conventional investigative techniques have been exhausted. Another significant consideration involves informed consent. Individuals who submit DNA to genealogy services typically do so for ancestry research or family history rather than criminal investigation. Modern genealogy providers increasingly allow users to make explicit decisions regarding whether their profiles may participate in law enforcement matching. Transparent consent policies have become an important mechanism for balancing investigative needs with individual privacy expectations. Scientific quality assurance remains equally important. Laboratories producing subprofiles must follow validated analytical procedures comparable in rigor to traditional forensic laboratories. Genealogists document research methods, maintain source citations, and preserve records supporting investigative conclusions. Independent review helps ensure that family tree reconstructions remain supported by reliable historical evidence rather than assumption. The emergence of investigative genetic genealogy has also encouraged police services to reassess historical evidence preservation practices. Detectives now recognize that biological material collected decades earlier may acquire new significance as laboratory technology continues to advance. Consequently, evidence custodians place considerable emphasis on maintaining secure storage conditions, accurate inventories, and complete chain of custody documentation throughout the lifetime of unresolved investigations. Canada's experience illustrates that investigative genetic genealogy represents an extension, not a replacement, of established forensic science. Successful applications depend upon several independent elements functioning together: careful crime scene investigation, proper evidence preservation, accredited laboratory analysis, comprehensive genealogical research, objective police investigation, and legally obtained forensic confirmation. The absence of any one component may prevent successful identification regardless of technological sophistication. As sequencing technologies continue improving and genealogical databases expand under evolving legal frameworks, investigative genetic genealogy will likely remain an important resource for carefully selected cold case investigations. At the same time, Canadian investigators continue emphasizing that scientific capability must develop alongside strong legal safeguards, transparent oversight, and respect for individual privacy. The discipline demonstrates how advances in genetics, historical research, and forensic science can complement traditional investigative methods while reinforcing a principle that has guided successful homicide investigations for decades. Preserving evidence carefully today creates opportunities for tomorrow's investigators to answer questions that current technology cannot yet resolve. Modern forensic genetics relies on multiple methods of DNA analysis, each developed to answer different scientific questions. Two of the most important approaches are short tandem repeat, stranger, profiling, and single nucleotide polymorphism, CP, analysis. Although both examine human DNA, they were designed for different purposes, use different laboratory techniques, generate different types of genetic information, and support different investigative objectives. Understanding these differences is essential to appreciating how contemporary forensic science investigates both current criminal cases and historical cold cases. Stranger profiling has been the international standard for forensic human identification since the 1990s. The method focuses on specific regions of DNA known as short tandem repeat small sequences of DNA that repeat multiple times. The number of repeated units varies naturally among individuals. By examining a standardized group of these locations, forensic scientists can generate a DNA profile that is highly effective for distinguishing one individual from another. One advantage of stray profiling is its efficiency. Only a relatively small number of carefully selected genetic locations need to be analyzed to produce an identification profile suitable for forensic comparison. Modern forensic laboratories routinely examine 20 or more standardized stray markers, allowing laboratories across different jurisdictions to compare profiles using consistent scientific standards. Because identical twins share the same inherited DNA, stray profiling generally cannot distinguish between them, but it remains highly discriminating for unrelated individuals. The primary purpose of stranger profiling is individual identification. Investigators compare the stera profile obtained from biological evidence with a reference sample collected from a known individual or with profiles lawfully contained within forensic DNA databases. When the profiles match under validated statistical criteria, scientists can conclude that the biological evidence is consistent with originating from the same individual. If the profiles differ, the individual can be excluded as the source of that evidence. This capability has made stray analysis one of the most valuable tools in criminal investigation. It supports the identification of unknown contributors to biological evidence, links multiple crime scenes involving the same unknown individual, excludes innocent persons, assists disaster victim identification, and contributes to the identification of missing persons under appropriate legal frameworks. Despite these strengths, stray profiling has an important limitation. It provides very little information regarding distant biological relationships. While close family relationships, such as parent-child or sibling relationships, may sometimes be evaluated using STIR data, the method is generally not suitable for identifying relatives separated by several generations. Consequently, if an unknown DNA profile does not match anyone whose reference sample is legally available, stray analysis alone may not identify the source. Single nucleotide polymorphism analysis was developed for a different scientific purpose, rather than examining a few dozen highly variable repeat regions. SUP analysis examines hundreds of thousands of individual genetic positions distributed throughout the genome. At each SUP location, individuals may differ by a single DNA base. Although any individual SUP contains relatively little identifying information, the combined analysis of hundreds of thousands of SUPs creates a detailed genetic dataset capable of revealing patterns of ancestry and biological relatedness. Because SUP analysis surveys a much larger portion of the human genome, it is especially valuable for estimating relationships among individuals who share common ancestors many generations in the past. Two distant cousins, for example, may share segments of DNA inherited from the same ancestor despite having no direct knowledge of one another. SUP analysis identifies these shared segments, allowing scientists to estimate the degree of biological relationship between individuals. This characteristic explains why SUP analysis forms the scientific foundation of investigative genetic genealogy. Rather than attempting to identify an unknown person directly, investigators first search for distant biological relatives whose DNA has been voluntarily made available in genealogy databases that permit law enforcement participation under defined conditions. The resulting matches provide genealogists with starting points for reconstructing extended family trees. The laboratory procedures used for STRADAR and SUP analysis also differ substantially. Stray profiling typically relies upon polymerase chain reaction, PCR, amplification of specific repeat regions, followed by fragment size analysis using capillary electrophoresis. The resulting electropherogram displays the number of repeats present at each strain marker. SUP analysis generally involves broader genomic examination using technologies such as high-density microarrays or next-generation sequencing. depending upon laboratory protocols and the condition of the available DNA. These methods evaluate hundreds of thousands of genetic positions simultaneously, producing far larger datasets than conventional forensic stray profiling. Because degraded historical evidence often presents scientific challenges, laboratories must carefully assess whether sufficient DNA quality remains available before attempting subanalysis. Data interpretation differs as well. Stray results are usually presented as a series of allele numbers corresponding to the repeat count observed at each marker. Statistical calculations estimate the rarity of that profile within a population, allowing scientists to evaluate the strength of a direct comparison between evidence and a known individual. Subanalysis, by contrast, produces information regarding shared genetic inheritance. Bioinformatics software estimates the amount of DNA shared between individuals, commonly measured in centimorgans, cm. Larger amounts of shared DNA generally indicate closer biological relationships, while smaller shared segments suggest more distant ancestry. Genealogists combine these genetic estimates with historical records to reconstruct family relationships. Another distinction concerns database use. Stranger profiles generated for forensic purposes may be compared with profiles lawfully maintained within national forensic DNA databases, subject to applicable legislation and judicial oversight. These databases are designed specifically for criminal investigation and identification. SUP data used in investigative genealogy generally involve separate genealogy databases whose primary purpose is ancestry research rather than criminal investigation. Access policies vary among service providers. Some prohibit law enforcement participation entirely. Others allow users to decide whether their genetic information may be included in investigations involving violent crime or unidentified human remains. The legal authority governing such searches depends upon the jurisdiction and applicable privacy legislation. Accuracy remains critically important for both methods. Accredited forensic laboratories employ validated analytical procedures, contamination controls, proficiency testing, and independent technical review regardless of whether straight or subanalysis is being performed. Scientific quality assurance ensures that laboratory conclusions remain reliable and reproducible. The choice between straight and subanalysis therefore reflects investigative objectives rather than differences in scientific rigor. The two methods should not be viewed as competitors. Instead, they perform complementary roles within modern forensic investigation. Stranger profiling remains the gold standard for confirming identity because it allows direct comparison between biological evidence and known reference samples. Subanalysis serves as an investigative intelligence tool capable of generating leads when no direct comparison is available. Once genealogy identifies a potential individual, investigators ordinarily return to conventional stranger profiling to perform the final forensic comparison capable of supporting investigative and judicial conclusions. The evolution of forensic genetics demonstrates how scientific advances expand investigative possibilities without replacing established forensic principles. Careful evidence preservation, proper chain of custody documentation, accredited laboratory procedures, and objective interpretation remain fundamental regardless of which analytical method is employed. As sequencing technologies continue improving and computational methods become increasingly sophisticated, both straight profiling and subanalysis are expected to remain central components of forensic science, each contributing distinct strengths to the investigation of contemporary crimes, unidentified human remains, and carefully selected historical cold cases. Over the past 4 decades, forensic genetics has evolved from relatively simple blood group analysis to sophisticated DNA profiling capable of identifying individuals with remarkable accuracy. Yet the field continues to develop rapidly. Advances in genomics, sequencing technology, computational biology, and bioinformatics are expanding the range of scientific questions that forensic laboratories may eventually be able to answer. While many of these technologies remain the subject of ongoing research and careful validation, they illustrate how forensic science continues to evolve alongside broader developments in molecular biology and data science. One of the most significant areas of advancement is next-generation sequencing, NGS, also known as massively parallel sequencing, MPS. Unlike conventional capillary electrophoresis used in traditional straight profiling, NGS technologies read millions of DNA fragments simultaneously. This greatly increases the amount of genetic information that can be obtained from a single biological sample. For forensic laboratories, the advantages of non-As extend beyond simply examining more DNA markers. scientists can analyze stator markers, submarkers, mitochondrial DNA, and other genetic regions within a single analytical workflow. The resulting datasets provide richer information while maintaining compatibility with many existing forensic identification standards. As laboratory costs continue to decline and validation studies expand, NINGS is expected to become increasingly integrated into forensic casework, particularly for complex or degraded samples. Another important area of development involves improved recovery of degraded DNA. Biological evidence recovered from historical investigations is often exposed to moisture, heat, ultraviolet radiation, microbial activity, or repeated handling over many years. These environmental factors break DNA into progressively smaller fragments, making laboratory analysis more difficult. Modern extraction methods continue to improve scientists' ability to recover usable DNA from challenging samples. New purification techniques, optimized chemical protocols, and improved sequencing technologies have increased the likelihood that previously unsuitable evidence can yield informative genetic results. Researchers continue investigating methods capable of analyzing highly fragmented DNA while minimizing contamination and preserving scientific reliability. Computational biology is also transforming forensic genomics. Modern laboratories increasingly rely on sophisticated software capable of analyzing extremely large genetic datasets. Bioinformatic algorithms assist scientists in organizing sequencing data, identifying genetic variants, estimating biological relationships, and performing statistical calculations that would be impractical through manual analysis alone. Artificial intelligence and machine learning have begun attracting interest within forensic research. These systems may eventually assist laboratories in recognizing analytical patterns, identifying sequencing artifacts, improving quality control, and supporting data interpretation. However, experts consistently emphasize that AI should function as a decision support tool rather than replacing scientific judgment. Human review, laboratory validation, and independent verification remain essential components of forensic practice. Researchers are also exploring improvements in DNA mixture interpretation. Crime scene evidence frequently contains biological material contributed by more than one individual. Interpreting these mixtures presents substantial scientific challenges because overlapping genetic information must be separated before meaningful comparisons can be performed. Advances in probabilistic genotyping software have significantly improved laboratories' ability to evaluate complex DNA mixtures. Rather than relying solely on simplified inclusion or exclusion decisions, probabilistic methods calculate statistical support for different interpretations while accounting for uncertainty. These approaches have become increasingly accepted within forensic laboratories following extensive scientific validation and peer-reviewed research. Another growing field involves forensic epigenetics. Unlike DNA sequence variation, epigenetic markers reflect chemical modifications that influence gene activity without altering the underlying genetic code. Researchers are investigating whether certain epigenetic patterns might eventually assist in estimating characteristics such as biological age or tissue type from forensic samples. Although promising, forensic epigenetics remains an active area of research rather than routine forensic practice. Scientists continue evaluating the reliability, reproducibility, and limitations of these methods before they can be considered suitable for widespread criminal investigations. As with all forensic innovations, extensive validation is required before laboratory implementation. Scientists are similarly studying forensic proteomics, which focuses on proteins rather than DNA, because proteins may survive environmental conditions that degrade genetic material. Protein analysis could eventually complement DNA evidence in selected investigations. Research continues into applications involving biological identification, tissue characterization, and the examination of highly degraded remains. The future of forensic genomics also includes continued advances in mitochondrial DNA (mRNA) analysis. Unlike nuclear DNA, mitochondrial DNA exists in hundreds or thousands of copies within each cell. This abundance makes mRNA particularly valuable when analyzing highly degraded skeletal remains, hair shafts lacking roots, or historical evidence containing only limited biological material. Although mitochondrial DNA cannot uniquely identify an individual in the same manner as nuclear DNA, improvements in sequencing technology have expanded its usefulness for missing persons investigations, disaster victim identification, archaeological research, and selected historical forensic investigations. International collaboration represents another important direction for forensic science. Research institutions, forensic laboratories, universities, and law enforcement agencies increasingly cooperate on validation studies, quality assurance initiatives, and methodological development. International scientific organizations continue publishing standardized recommendations that promote consistency in laboratory procedures, statistical interpretation, reporting practices, and accreditation requirements. Quality assurance will remain central to future developments. Every new technology introduced into forensic casework must undergo extensive validation before being adopted for routine investigations. Validation studies evaluate analytical sensitivity, specificity, reproducibility, contamination risk, error rates, and statistical performance under controlled laboratory conditions. Accreditation bodies require laboratories to demonstrate that new methods meet established scientific standards before they are implemented operationally. Legal and ethical considerations will continue evolving alongside scientific capability. Advances in genomic technology raise important questions regarding privacy, informed consent, data security, proportionality, and responsible investigative use. Legislators, courts, ethicists, scientists, and law enforcement agencies all contribute to developing frameworks that balance investigative effectiveness with protection of individual rights. Public confidence remains essential for the continued success of forensic genomics. Transparent laboratory procedures, independent oversight, peer-reviewed scientific research, standardized reporting practices, and ongoing professional education all contribute to maintaining trust in forensic evidence presented within the criminal justice system. Scientific capability alone is insufficient. Confidence depends equally upon accountability, openness, and adherence to rigorous professional standards. Looking ahead, forensic genomics is likely to become increasingly multidisciplinary. Molecular genetics, computational biology, artificial intelligence, statistics, genealogy, anthropology, chemistry, pathology, and digital technologies will continue interacting to address increasingly complex investigative questions. Each discipline contributes distinct expertise while remaining subject to common scientific principles of validation, documentation, reproducibility, and independent review. Despite these remarkable technological advances, one principle has remained constant throughout the evolution of forensic science. The quality of scientific conclusions depends fundamentally upon the quality of the original evidence. Careful crime scene documentation, proper evidence collection, secure preservation, meticulous chain of custody procedures, and objective laboratory practice continue to form the foundation upon which every later scientific development depends. Future forensic genomics will undoubtedly expand investigative capabilities, but its success will continue to rely on the same disciplined investigative practices that have guided forensic science for decades. Forensic genomics continues to evolve at a pace unmatched by almost any other discipline within forensic science. Improvements in DNA sequencing, computational biology, molecular genetics, and bioinformatics are steadily expanding the range of scientific tools available to investigators. While traditional stray profiling remains the international standard for human identification, researchers are exploring technologies capable of extracting more information from increasingly challenging biological evidence. The future of forensic genomics is therefore not defined by replacing existing methods, but by integrating new scientific approaches into established investigative frameworks while maintaining rigorous standards of validation, transparency, and legal oversight. One of the most significant developments is the continuing maturation of next-generation sequencing, NGS, often referred to as massively parallel sequencing, MPS. Unlike conventional strain analysis, which examines a limited number of genetic markers, InEGX technologies can analyze hundreds or thousands of genomic regions simultaneously. This expanded capability allows scientists to recover useful genetic information from evidence that may have been too degraded or too limited for older analytical methods. Researchers continue refining sequencing platforms to improve sensitivity, reduce costs, shorten processing times, and increase reliability for forensic applications. Another important area of research focuses on ultra-low template DNA analysis. Crime scene evidence sometimes contains only a few human cells or highly fragmented DNA molecules. Historically, these samples frequently produced incomplete or inconclusive results. Improvements in extraction chemistry, DNA repair techniques, amplification methods, and sequencing technologies are gradually increasing the likelihood that laboratories can recover meaningful genetic information from minimal biological material. At the same time, scientists recognize that greater analytical sensitivity also increases the importance of contamination prevention, making stringent laboratory quality assurance more essential than ever. Bioinformatics has become an indispensable component of modern forensic genomics. Today's sequencing instruments generate enormous quantities of digital genetic data that require sophisticated computational analysis before meaningful scientific interpretation is possible. Specialized software identifies genetic variants, evaluates sequence quality, reconstructs DNA profiles, and performs statistical analyses that support laboratory conclusions. As sequencing technologies continue improving, advances in computational algorithms will remain closely linked to improvements in forensic capability. Machine learning and artificial intelligence are increasingly being investigated as tools that may support forensic laboratories. Researchers are evaluating whether carefully validated algorithms can assist with data quality assessment, interpretation of complex DNA mixtures, detection of sequencing artifacts, and identification of patterns that may otherwise require extensive manual review. Importantly, current scientific consensus emphasizes that such systems should complement, not replace, the expertise of trained forensic scientists. Independent technical review, transparent validation, and human oversight remain essential components of forensic decision-making. Research into forensic epigenetics represents another promising direction. Epigenetic markers are chemical modifications that influence how genes function without changing the underlying DNA sequence. Scientists are investigating whether these markers may eventually assist in estimating biological characteristics, such as approximate age or distinguishing among certain tissue types recovered from crime scenes. Although encouraging research results have been reported, these techniques remain under scientific evaluation and have not yet become routine forensic tools. Extensive validation is required before they can be incorporated into accredited laboratory practice. Closely related research involves forensic transcriptomics, the study of RNA molecules rather than DNA, because different cell types express distinct RNA profiles. Transcriptomic analysis may eventually improve scientists' ability to identify the biological origin of forensic samples. Such capabilities could assist investigators in interpreting complex evidence while complementing traditional DNA analysis. Like epigenetics, however, forensic transcriptomics remains an active area of research requiring continued scientific validation. Scientists are also expanding applications involving mitochondrial DNA sequencing. Mitochondrial DNA exists in many more copies per cell than nuclear DNA, making it particularly valuable when analyzing degraded remains, historical specimens, or hair shafts lacking root tissue. Modern sequencing technologies have substantially improved mitochondrial DNA analysis, increasing its usefulness for missing person investigations, disaster victim identification, anthropological research, and selected forensic investigations where conventional nuclear DNA analysis may be limited. International research efforts continue exploring methods for improving DNA mixture interpretation. Biological evidence recovered from crime scenes frequently contains DNA contributed by multiple individuals. Advances in probabilistic genotyping have already improved the statistical evaluation of such mixtures, but ongoing research seeks to enhance software performance, refine mathematical models, and improve interpretation of increasingly complex genetic datasets. These developments are expected to strengthen the scientific reliability of forensic conclusions involving mixed biological evidence. The future of forensic genomics also depends upon continued investment in quality assurance. Every new laboratory technique must undergo rigorous scientific validation before being adopted for operational casework. Validation studies examine analytical accuracy, reproducibility, sensitivity, specificity, contamination risk, robustness, and statistical performance. International accreditation standards require laboratories to demonstrate that new methods consistently produce reliable and scientifically defensible results. This emphasis on validation ensures that technological innovation proceeds without compromising scientific integrity. Ethical and legal considerations will remain equally important as technology advances. Expanding genomic capabilities raise questions concerning privacy, informed consent, data security, proportionality, and responsible investigative use. Legislators, courts, regulatory authorities, scientists, and ethics specialists continue examining how best to balance investigative opportunities with individual rights. Transparent governance frameworks will be essential for maintaining public confidence as forensic genomics becomes increasingly sophisticated. Another emerging priority involves long-term digital evidence management. Modern genomic investigations generate substantial volumes of electronic data requiring secure storage, documentation, and future accessibility. Forensic agencies are developing improved systems for managing sequence files, laboratory documentation, analytical software versions, and quality assurance records. Effective digital preservation helps ensure that scientific findings remain reproducible and available for independent review many years after an investigation has concluded. Collaboration across scientific disciplines is expected to become even more important. Modern forensic genomics increasingly integrates expertise from molecular biology, genetics, statistics, computer science, chemistry, anthropology, pathology, genealogy, and law. Universities, forensic laboratories, research institutions, and law enforcement agencies continue cooperating on validation studies, technological development, and professional education. Such multidisciplinary collaboration accelerates scientific progress while promoting standardized practices across jurisdictions. Cold case investigations are likely to remain among the greatest beneficiaries of future genomic advances. Evidence collected decades earlier may become suitable for new forms of laboratory analysis as technologies continue improving. This reality reinforces one of the enduring lessons of forensic science: careful evidence collection, meticulous documentation, secure preservation, and complete chain of custody records preserve opportunities for future investigators to apply methods that may not yet exist at the time evidence is collected. Looking forward, forensic genomics will continue expanding the scientific tools available to criminal investigations, but technological sophistication alone will not determine investigative success. Reliable conclusions will always depend upon validated laboratory procedures, objective scientific interpretation, transparent reporting, judicial oversight, and adherence to established professional standards. As genomic technologies become more powerful, maintaining these foundational principles becomes increasingly important. The future of forensic genomics is therefore best understood not as a single technological breakthrough, but as the continued integration of scientific innovation with responsible forensic practice. Advances in sequencing, computational biology, bioinformatics, and molecular genetics will undoubtedly enhance investigators' ability to analyze biological evidence. Yet the enduring strength of forensic science will continue to rest upon the same principles that have guided the discipline for decades: rigorous methodology, careful preservation of evidence, independent verification, respect for legal safeguards, and a commitment to objective scientific inquiry. Together, these principles ensure that future generations of investigators can make full use of emerging technologies while maintaining the accuracy, fairness, and public trust upon which the criminal justice system depends.